calling to order Historic Landmarks Commission.
Recording in progress.
All right, calling to order Historic Landmarks Commission, February 12th, 2025. All right, so we'll do a roll call. We'll probably end up with a couple commissioners coming in a little late because parking was difficult. All right.
Thank you. Okay, I'll take roll call now. Commissioner Butler.
Here.
Commissioner Jordan is not here. Commissioner Drury.
Here.
Commissioner Ensberg.
Here.
Commissioner McClure.
Yes, here.
And then Chair Grumbine.
Here. All right,
We have quorum.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now let's start with item A, public comment. So any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within our jurisdiction that is not scheduled on this agenda for public discussion. All right, so is there anyone in the room first that wants to talk about something that's not on our agenda?
So I do have one speaker slip so far for general public comment, and that's for Rick Clausen, if you want to come on up. And anybody else that wants to speak during general, just go ahead and bring it up to me right now, and you can be next.
Good afternoon, commissioners. I am happy to be here. Excuse me. I've been managing daytime films at the Arlington all last week and this, and I didn't think until just a day or two ago that I was going to be free to come, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm going to speak on public comment, not about the item that you all know is near and dear to my heart because I sent you an extensive written comment. But instead, the latest issue, the winter 2025 issue of Preservation Magazine, which is the publication for the National Trust of Historic Preservation, and it has in it what many of us have known about for at least a week because it was on their website, but a nice article about the preservation, the rehabilitation of the band shell. It's even nicer than it was online because it's a bigger picture of the second picture. Okay. This is germane to me because, as you know, if you followed the successful appeal of the Parks and Rec decision to change the street tree on East Anapamu, this was an example, the band shell was an example of what I think has been an unfortunate theme of people perhaps, people just thinking of landmarks as being structures and throwing 1.4 million to the renovation of a structure that had basically the same faults as the trees. They got old, they got dilapidated, they became a public safety issue, but they were remediated in very different ways. My point to you today is just that there is a wellspring of people in this community that support the historic landmarks, the historic aspects of our city. And I know that you sometimes feel inhibited to take bold steps for fear of overstepping that community sense. It is there, and I wish that you would please let us show it to you.
All right, thank you.
I don't have any other speaker slips. I don't have anybody online, and we don't have any written correspondence for general public comments, so go ahead and close it. Back to you.
All right, thank you. All right, in that case, we're done with public comment. We'll go on to item B, approval of the minutes of the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting of January 29th, 2025.
So moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Under discussion, any edits or additions, changes, etc.? All right, good. How's that parking lot? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, you only missed public comment, but it was a really good public comment.
As they all are.
Yes, it was worth going over the 2 minutes. All right, and so we are doing minutes right now. So I'm not seeing any edits to the minutes. So with that, why don't we have a motion and a second. So let's have a roll call vote, please.
Okay, Commissioner Drury.
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg.
Yes.
Commissioner Butler.
Yes.
Commissioner Lenvik.
Yes.
Commissioner McClure.
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli.
Yes.
And Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right. On to item C, approval of minutes of Historic Landmarks Commission consent meeting of January 29th, 2025.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other, or any edits or discussion for the consent calendar? All right, seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lenvick,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. On to item D, ratification of action taken on the consent calendar for February 12th, 2025.
Motion to ratify the calendar.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. And then, so now to staff.
Thank you, Chair Grumbine. There was only one item on today's consent calendar. Item A was 2209 Chapala Street, which received project design approval and continued to staff for final approval with the condition that the address numbers be refined to match the aesthetics of the gate using either perforated metal or individually mounted letters. And that was all.
All right. So with that, any other discussion or questions? All right. So now this is just ratification of the action. So, and we have a motion. So let's vote. Do you do a roll call vote for approval of the ratification?
Okay.
Consent calendar.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lenvick,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Great. All right, now we are on to item E, announcements, requests by applicants for continuances and withdrawals, future agenda items, and appeals.
Staff has one announcement at this time, so I'll turn it over to Nicole Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. We have scheduled a neighborhood meeting in San Roque to kick off the survey and historic context project, scheduled for March 13th at 6 to 7 p.m. at Peabody Charter School, and we would love to have one commissioner volunteer to attend to hear about the project and hear the public comments and be part of that meeting.
Also volunteer.
All right.
Great.
That's your house.
Thank
And Mr. Butler, if you
Is
want to
there-
join me.
Is it okay if two, if they want to?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, can you repeat the date?
It's March 13th. March 13th.
Yes, I would be happy to.
Yeah, as long as we have
March 19th or 13th?
13th.
13th.
Thursday the 13th. at
Thursday, okay.
Peabody.
Great. Well, having two commissioners instead of one is even better, so that's great. Thank you.
Twice as good.
But thank you
Yeah.
for volunteering.
Yeah.
We don't know about that yet.
Yeah, I
You said
think
it's a
our
Piedmont?
Peabody.
Peabody. Yeah, I'll send the flyer out to you all. It just got
Okay.
done today, and we have a website up for it. And the consultant will be doing a PowerPoint and really
Exciting.
talking to the community.
Mr. Chair,
Refreshments available?
Commissioner Drury?
with three
Yes,
commissioners
we are
be
going to have
okay, too?
refreshment.
I'd like to go.
Okay,
Also.
so as a third, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem with Brown Act, so,
I promise I won't say anything.
okay, Commissioner.
I don't promise.
All right, great. Thank you, all three of you, for volunteering for that. And we look forward to hearing you report back at the meeting following that one.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may make one more announcement. Yeah, Ellen Kokinda, Design Review Supervisor. I just wanted to let you know that we do have one opening on the HLC. And so it is, the spring recruitment has started and there are deadlines to it. There's deadlines to request resignation. Hopefully that's not happening here, but I'm really here just to remind anybody, if you know of someone who might be interested in applying, please reach out to me, let me know. Happy to talk to them about it. But again, there's one opening, and I think it's a pretty open field in terms of qualifications.
There's a couple in the audience that might want to
Then they wouldn't have
watch
public
them,
comment.
watch them point to each other.
Then they wouldn't have public comment
That's right,
opportunity.
that's true. Okay, so we've got our three, any other announcements, et cetera? Commissioner Lenvick?
Yes, I noticed in the most recent edition of the magazine for the National Trust for Historic Preservation that the bandshell in Pershing Park has been recognized.
Yeah, and actually, that was what Commissioner,
That's
that's what.
Pardon me. I'm sorry to be late. I'm sorry to be late.
And he even had visuals.
I missed that.
Yeah, that was our one public comment was showing the article on that.
Yeah, it was interesting. If I recall, a great deal of the success of that design, did you say this as well? Was due to landmarks. If I recall that, I was on the commission then. And
Are we patting ourselves
I think,
back now?
and it was not mentioned in the article, but if I recall, it was, yeah.
The modification, you mean?
Well, the whole 9 yards, the idea of where to get the ramp in and.
Oh, yeah. And they had a very good architect that can do historic work very well and sensitively, and and worked very well with us. Yeah, I agree.
So I apologize to the,
To now it's
from the
twice.
audience.
Twice. But that's great. No, it is really,
Okay.
really great to see it. All right, other, let's see, announcements, et cetera.
Just a little quick piece of local business. There seem to be many more commissioners here today because all of the SWATs out there in the parking lot.
I think
were
they're
full.
volunteers.
So I'm double parked and
Yeah. And if anyone here or will come into the room, hopefully, I left a handwritten note saying that I was in here and just kind of blocked them. So, so if you do see someone coming in, we might have to let them know, and then at a break, agenda item break.
They shouldn't be parking in your spot then.
Yeah, I tried to block mostly commissioner cars, but there was one unknown car. So, all right. So in
find
case we
out.
have a disruption. Okay. So then, any other announcements, et cetera?
Faces down
Mr.
right
Chair,
now.
there are 2 open parking spots, valid parking spots. I could run out there and save them right now if
weren't
you all
there
want to
when
move them.
I don't mind the uncomfortable.
I pulled in.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll send.
Unless there's someone in the room, then that's bad. But
I'll
yeah.
send a message. I might get a message back that they need to be moved. But
Yeah, that's fine. They can come here and hang out and see what HLC is like for a little while, and then we can. Yeah. Okay. So then, any other announcements, et cetera? All right. Let's go on to item F, subcommittee reports. So of our list here, signs, State Street Advisory, Objective Design Standards, designations, Plaza de la Guerra, and State Street Interim, and/or any other?
I would say that designations would have a report next time after we attend this little workshop.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Commissioner Ensberg.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know that Commissioner Dordan will want to talk about the ODDS for HLC, right?
No,
Well, it was at council and it passed.
it passed.
So that's
Yeah, it
important.
passed.
Yeah,
Success story.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unanimous. And Commissioner Dordan was there to speak for the commission, which did his usual very excellent delivery.
Right.
And then on the State Street Interim Working Group, we had a meeting last week, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
And got an update on what's going on with that and trying to move the FF&E part of it forward, continuing, looked at some different examples of furniture and tables and chairs and such. And we're going to be having another meeting, I think, at the end of next week to kind of follow up. So it's moving along well, I think.
And then full HLC will be seeing that once it's kind of all put together. It'll come before you all, right?
Yes, yes. So that was
Great,
that. Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Just as a matter of enlightenment for those who are watching and don't know what F and E means, would be furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Yeah. For State Street. So, and I don't think there's an Adirondack chair on there yet. Sorry, too soon. All right, any other subcommittee reports? Okay, all right, in that case, we are done with item F, and we are pretty much right on target for our first item, which is a structure of merit designation for item 1 for 615 East Valerio Street. This is a request to adopt a resolution 2025-3 designating the craftsman-style residence constructed in 1925 through 26 a historic structure of merit. All right. And so to Ms. Hernandez.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Today we have the nomination for 615 East Valerio Street to be designated a structure of merit. It was added to the inventory in 2014 by the Historic Landmarks Commission, constructed in 1925-26 in the craftsman style. The building sits on Valerio Street as you go up towards Grand Avenue, and you can see here every property that's lit up as a structure of merit or on the inventory. And this section of the Lower Riviera is where many historically significant homes constructed in the early 20th century are located, including a diverse collection of, there's a Queen Anne Free Classic building across the street, Spanish Colonial Revival, American Colonial Revival homes, in addition to craftsman homes, and the Green and Green house that's around the corner as well. This little craftsman is an excellent example of the craftsman style, particularly as the craftsman appeared throughout the first 3 decades of the 20th century, at a time when Santa Barbara was experiencing massive growth. The Riviera was long considered too arid and too barren to settle, and then the Riviera hamlet reinvented itself in Santa Barbara as one of the most alluring neighborhoods over the first half of the 19th century. And the neighborhood is mostly residential development, primarily single-family homes set on large parcels, though there are some multi-residential buildings mixed in. And the majority of the housing stock of this area was completed between 1915 and 1975. While there is some new construction, it has not been substantially altered, so the essential character of the streetscape, which features an irregular layout of streets transecting Mission Ridge's deeply sloping lots, provide views towards the Pacific Ocean. In addition, the roads, the subdivision, and the subdividers planted oak trees, enhancing the area's slopes. And sandstone is extensively employed in the neighborhood for delineating roadway edging, retaining walls, steps, boundary walls, built by the Italian stonemasons, including John Antolini, Antonio De Ros, and Jos Sakonagi, under the direction of Joseph Dover. The finely built walls and parapets and piers have been one of the most characteristic features of the neighborhood since its construction. And this house has an excellent example of a wall and a garage constructed right on the street face, as you can see in this photo. The property owner who requested the designation actually did the rather extensive research on the property owners, dating back to the real estate agents that bought the vacant lot around 1922 to 26, and the original first residents that were noted to be in the house by 1926, Coleman Everett Stewart and his wife, and he was a notable attorney in Santa Barbara and active participant in numerous civic organizations, as well as the next residents, Maurice Faulkner, who moved in with his family in 1942, who had a distinguished career in the music and made significant contributions to Santa Barbara through music career. And again, the building does retain a high amount of integrity, not only in location, setting, materials, design, and workmanship. Almost all the original materials are there in association, and it conveys its original appearance. It's kind of high up on the hill when you're looking down from the street. The only alteration on this is the solar panels, but as per the Secretary of Interior, they would meet number 10, which are removable, and you take those off and you have the essence of the house again. Again, the Riviera is a little difficult for solar panels on non-visible elevations of a house with just a side gable roof, because the other gable faces north and the panels wouldn't work faces north. And so the building does qualify for criterion 3 as an example of the craftsman style with sandstone walls and garage. As we all know, the craftsman style became so popular through the promotion of the Craftsman magazine published by Gustav Stickley, as well as came in varieties. It came in designed houses like the Green and Green house, but also through the kits that were widely distributed through Southern California, including Santa Barbara. And this house in particular has the following character-defining features of the craftsman style, including the low sloped side gabled roof, the wide overhanging eave with the really unique arched opening, arch over the front opening held up by the large brackets characteristic of the craftsman style, the wide front door with the framed by the side lights, and then this one has just almost a wall of sets of divided light casement windows and sets of 3 and 4 that go up and down each elevation on the front, giving it really great light. It also has the characteristic wood clapboard walls. And again, the sandstone is also very significant as it exemplifies Santa Barbara's tie to local masonry construction. And that is the conclusion of my summary of the report for you.
Great,
And I'm open
thank
to
you.
discussion. And I believe the owner's here and has some words to say.
Yeah, did you want to come and say something? You could say something there. Actually, that's probably easier than up here. Yeah.
Hello, my name is William Radford. My wife.
Oh, let's make sure. There we go. You're mic'd there.
Okay. I'm William Radford. My wife Kim and I have owned the house for about 21 years now. And thank you to Nicole for putting together all the work, putting this together. So I'd just like to say we've really enjoyed living in this house. We're doing a lot of work to renovate it and maintain it into the future. And just a couple of things we really liked about it is Nicole pointed out the lighting with the extensive French doors. We really appreciated how the design of that is kind of just awesome for living in Santa Barbara with our climate and environment here. But also the work that went in, or the design details at that time for environmental efficiency with cross ventilation, the casement windows, how they flow air into the house, the use of the French doors on the south facing. It's just a really nice, well-designed house, and we've really enjoyed living there.
Thank you. Thank you for taking care of it. All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have a procedural, I live less than 100 yards away from this house. Am I allowed to comment?
Well, yeah, we'll ignore it.
Less than 100 yards? That's less than less than 500 feet.
Considered a
Pass
conflict
your
of
question
interest.
to the next commissioner. Just pass it.
Pardon my interruption, through the chair to Commissioner Drury, yes, that's a conflict of interest, so you'll need to abstain from the vote.
I must
Okay,
not do.
but he can have
I must not
questions
make-
still?
Yes, he can ask
Okay,
questions.
great.
So,
And also
So
just a
you can
reminder.
stay here, ask questions, but you can't vote.
okay.
Yeah.
And also just a reminder, we need to open public comment for that.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so if that concludes the presentation and the comments from the owners, let's open public comment. Anyone from the public in the room wishing to comment on this item?
I don't currently have any speaker slips for this item. We do have one person online. If they would like to speak, they can raise their hand. But I'm not seeing any raised hands. And I didn't receive any written correspondence on this item, so close it and toss it back to you.
Great. All right, so we'll close public comment and on to the commission for questions. Questions from anyone? All right.
Comments, but no
All right, let's roll into comments then. All right,
I do have one question.
okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just was wondering if the owners could maybe comment on what they found to be like really helpful in this whole process. I know Nicole is incredible. We're so lucky to have her. But just, understanding, sometimes when these old houses, they're, can be really in not very good shape, and sometimes the wood windows are falling apart. But yet, when you bring them back, you can work on them. So I just was curious to hear from you, like what you thought were, like what would you suggest was the most helpful, or maybe suggestions as to how it could be better. It'd be great to hear from you.
Do you want to?
If,
you'll have to
are
do
they
the
allowed
mic,
to
sorry.
do that? Yeah.
Yeah, because that way, it's on city TV, you can record it. So.
Preserved for posterity.
So this is all relatively new to us. We got involved in it because we're doing some renovations on the house, and it was part of the permitting process we went through here. A couple of things that I found helpful. Nicole provided some valuable information list of people who would work on doors and windows and things like that. It was important for us to try to maintain as much of the original as we could. I think, so that was one thing that we found very helpful. I guess more reference information like that, people that are interested in, doing, restoration and maintaining the character, just resources, contractors, designers, whoever has familiarity in that is what comes to my mind.
And just a follow-up question to that, thank you. So you were already, you weren't a person that needed to be convinced. You already were there, you already recognized and appreciated the history of the house, so you didn't need to be educated or encouraged to do that. You already came from that place?
Yes, I mean, part of what attracted us to the house was its historical character or whatever when we purchased it. And my wife and I both, though, we've tended to live in old houses for a variety of reasons our whole life, so we just, really resonate with that. And so as we got into it and realized, we wanted to stay there for quite a while, but, we wanted to do things, make it a little more livable, but maintain the character and do that sort of stuff. So, yeah, we were enthusiastic for help and how to go about doing that, in an effective and efficient manner.
Great. Thank you.
Can I add two things that he didn't say?
Sure.
First, actually, a lot of people were like, "You're doing what? Do you know what that is? Like, is that okay?" So I actually was curious, and I asked Bill a lot of questions about the downsides of this or the risks. Y'all are a little scary.
We don't mean to be.
I appreciate that.
Well,
This is
most
fun
of
to
us don't
watch.
mean to be.
Right, I get that too. But what I'll say was helpful is that the map, well, Nicole has been wonderful, thank you. And the map that she showed demonstrated that some of our neighbors have the designation, and talking to them was what really gave me a sense of just comfort that this wasn't going to be a very scary or risky in some way process. And then the other thing I'll just say as feedback is you sent a blue mailer to all of our neighbors, and it was lovely and fine. We don't have any objection to that, but it didn't, in my opinion, do a great job of explaining what this is. And so they had questions, which again was fine. We were happy to talk to our neighbors about this process because some of them came and sort of said, "I can't be here on Wednesday, but what is this?" So you made our neighbors curious, but you didn't really give them as much information as perhaps you could have about what we were up to.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. Thanks for that feedback. All right. Okay, any other questions? All right, comments? Commissioner, Vice Chair Woolley?
I'll take a stab at it. There are, pardon me, there are a lot of craftsman buildings in this town, and all wonderful. I think what makes your house particularly appealing is that subtle little arched eyebrow over the front door. While it's a common craftsman style detail, it's not commonly used. I mean, you don't see many houses with that lovely little detail on it. So I'm totally supportive of the nomination.
Great.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Norton?
I also am totally supportive, and I just, one quick comment, to see the owner talked about the environmental qualities of the house, cross ventilation and so forth. To see a craftsman with solar panels, to me, is a real evidence of the viability of traditional architecture to evolve and survive and contribute well into the future. It's a great combination of old and new technologies.
And maybe Tesla will design a wood shingle like solar one day. Solar mini solar panels. Okay, other comments? All right, then seeming like a support. So let's who'd like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2025-3, designating 615 East Valerio Street as a structure of merit.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, Commissioner Lenvick,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Commissioner Jordan,
Yes.
Commissioner Drury,
Abstain?
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then to the owners, if you would come up, we have a resolution of designation as a structure of merit for you.
You don't have to wait for it to be mailed to you. We're gonna hand it to you right now.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. So it says on February 12th, 2025, the Historic Landmarks Commission officially designated 615 East Valerio Street a historic structure of merit based on its architectural and historical importance to the heritage of the city of Santa Barbara. The building is an important contribution to the beauty of our community. All right. Thank you. All right. Okay, so now let's go on to item 2. So this is a miscellaneous item. This is Certified Local Government 2023 to 2024 Annual Report. Review and approve the Certified Local Government 2023 to 2024 Annual Report as required by the California Office of Historic Preservation. So, all right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission. This is our annual report. The year goes from October 1st to September 30th. And so what we accomplished in that time is we designated 9 structures of merit. We had 13 additions to the Historic Resources Inventory. We had 11 new Mills Act applications, and you as a commission in public hearings reviewed 79 different projects in that time. It's a lot.
Some good work.
You've been busy. That does not include any of the new construction on your agendas. So that's a summary of it. The rest of the report just outlines the trainings and the attendance and things like that. So let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Now, if that completes your presentation, let's go to public comment. Anyone in the room wishing to comment on how much work we did this last year?
I don't currently have any speaker slips for this item. We do still have that one person online. If they want to speak, they can raise their hand. Not seeing any raised hands, and there was no written correspondence on this item, so I'll give it back to you.
All right. To the commission, any questions or discussion? Yes.
Not
Commissioner
this is
Butler.
a great document, but
Oh, you want to turn your mic on? Sorry.
but I did find a typo, which is proof that I read it.
Unless it's in the first paragraph, then
So, yeah, it wasn't the first. Top of page 4, you'll find, on your red line,
Okay.
you'll, yeah, but I did read it,
right.
Nicole, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Butler. Any other comment or discussion?
I suppose it would be helpful, just say, there's a typo in the document, but not say where, and then they have to look at the whole
Really
thing.
make her work for it? She wrote it.
Mr. Chair, if there are no more comments or questions, I'll move approval of the Certified Local Governments Report 2023-2024.
I'll second that.
All right. Thank you for Vice Chair Uli and Commissioner Jordan. We have a motion and a second. Under discussion. Any further discussion? All right. Let's have a roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Jordan,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lenvick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes?
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right.
God, we are right
Thank you.
on time.
Woo, right on time. All right. So we are on to item 3. This is a miscellaneous item, the MEA Guidelines on Historic Resources. This is a staff presentation on updates to the Master Environmental Assessment, the MEA, guidelines pertaining to historic resources, requesting recommendation to the City Council to approve the updates to the MEA guidelines for historic resources. All right. So, Ms. Hernandez.
Okay, so I have a presentation for you. So it's like the cliff notes of the document.
Great.
Okay, so this is the cover sheet of our 2025 Master Environmental Assessment for Historic Resources. The last edition came out in 2022, so it's been 22 years. And since 2002 was when the first one was adopted. Now, since then, in 2013, the city did adopt a historic resources element as part of our general plan, giving guidance on goals of our preservation program. And in 2019, the city became a certified partner in the federal preservation program, which is part of the National Preservation Act and a testament to our commitment to protecting and celebrating our resources. So given that, it has been long overdue that we needed to update our MEA guidelines for historic resources so that it aligns with the CEQA guidelines and case law that has changed over the past 22 years, the National Preservation Standards, and the historic resources section of our own zoning ordinance that was adopted in 2021. So what is really new in the guidelines, it's clear guidance on when reports are required by a qualified consultant or can be completed by the city's architectural historian. It streamlines and clarifies the environmental review process for historic resources. And it standardizes the formats for the evaluations, ensuring consistency and quality in reports by professionals and city staff. So this is our 2002 cover of our guidelines. What was in there that's not in our new one is extensive background on the city's history that can be found in other documents like the historic resources element, and outdated regulatory framework. We didn't want to add that because as regulatory framework is changed, it dates the document immediately. And that can be researched so easily now with the internet and all the sources we have online. It also directly copied many passages straight from CEQA and listed long places for places to review records, and had outdated appendices, like lists of the historic resources that actually change monthly as we designate and find new resources. So none of that is included in this one. This one's much more succinct as to what is expected from the consultants and staff when they prepare an HSSR. And one of those is that we're changing the name of the HSSR to Historic Resources Report. And that nomenclature is because a resource is a broader term, and a resource is defined by CEQA, any object, building, structure, site, area, place, record, or manuscript which we determine to be historically significant. And that includes cultural landscapes and living resources. And so to keep consistent, we wanted this to be a historic resource report. So again, we can look a little bit beyond just structures and sites. So the environmental review process, one of the most important things is we really want people to contact the architectural historian for the city as soon as possible for an early consultation. Find out if there is any data on the building. Some buildings we have extensive research on, some we have nothing. So we don't want an applicant to pay for a consultant when we have a lot of the research done at our office. Again, this is a lot to help applicants save time and money and help them through our review process as quickly as possible, as we know it's hard enough if you don't have all the information we have in our office. And the submittal, once a project is submitted by the applicant, lots of times, as we know, that is when it triggers an evaluation for historic significance, either by the architectural historian, the staff, or a qualified consultant. And so when a qualified consultant does a report, these are typically triggered when it's a large project like a demolition, which these are 3 examples of projects you recently reviewed with consultant reports. And they're also usually rather complicated histories. It's not just a black and white, yes, this is historic, yes, no, this isn't. It needs a lot of research. And these are all proposed for demolition. If you remember, the motorcycle shop and the Macy's were found not significant, and the little Milpas building was found significant in those reports. These are examples of projects that I've evaluated as the architectural historian. The one on the top left is probably a typical project I see sometimes like several times a week. Usually they're like late 50s and 60s buildings that were just done as tract homes and don't have much architectural significance that we can determine quickly. They're not significant and send to single family design board. Or like the telephone building had no history written on it, but because they were only proposing minor changes, I was able to do the history and help them meet the Secretary of Interior standards on a staff level. And the one on the lower right was one that came in last week. They just wanted to do some minor changes. I was able to evaluate it over the counter. Yes, this is a significant Tudor built in 1929, and add it to the inventory and help them with their changes. We do have minor and major alterations, sort of who would evaluate the alterations. I do minor ones with a typical memo to the Secretary of Interior standards. Most of the projects I evaluate go to consent. They're like replacement of deteriorative features or minimally visible alterations and additions, whereas the major alterations often require a consultant, especially if they're major alterations to character defining features and the owner wants to work with a consultant. And often you'll see these, we see them a lot here when they're doing large two-story additions. So the qualified consultant reports, you probably know all the qualified consultants must meet the Secretary of Interior standards for qualified, professional qualifications. And we keep a list of that, and they submit their resumes to get on that list. The reports, this is really important. We really only want to accept reports by a consultant if it's required by either the architectural historian for the city or the State Office of Historic Preservation. And the reason is we don't want to have applicants go and spend the extra expense to have a professional evaluation if it's not necessary, because they cost a lot more and they take time, and we do have the expertise on staff if we can do it for them. And we also want them to call to discuss the scope of work. First of all, we don't want them to move ahead with the phase 2 if we haven't had the discussion here at the commission if it qualifies for significance in the first place. So we really want to stop at that phase 1 and then go to the phase 2 afterwards. So sometimes if they don't call me, they'll go ahead and do a lot of research, and some of it I have in-house, and they didn't need to do it. Again, it's really trying to help the applicants save time and money and get through our process. And again, you'll typically see consultants' reports on the demolition of buildings that may have some historic significance. In rare instances, the HLC can require the report. If one, like you don't agree with the architectural historian's evaluation, you want some further analysis. Anytime you can do this in the design review process prior to a project design approval. Project design approval, it's over again. But just keep in mind, if you do require that, you are adding a lot of cost and time at the expense of the applicant to their project. So try and have a really good basis for requesting the report and see what, before you do that. So report submittal process, the draft comes into the architectural historian just like it does now. A lot of this is what we've been doing for years. We're just finally getting it in writing, which is great. So for people who are new to it, it's right there in black and white, so it's not so verbal as we are doing lately, since our old one was so outdated. Typically, I go through and just make sure it meets the MEA guidelines, and this new one's going to be great because I can just go down the checklist. Did you do all these things in this order? And I can give them comments. Typically, my comments might be like, oh, you didn't mention that this 1920s house is a representative of like the Santa Barbara Beautiful movement, or that, you know, some things that I might know that they forgot to talk about. And then they submit the final report for the HLC hearing, and the consultant's required to be present to present their findings. As a reminder, we've talked about this a lot here, a disagreement of experts. If the commission disagrees with the conclusions of the report, the consulting historian refuses, based on their professional opinion, to amend it. It ends up in an environmental impact report, which is required. So most of the goal of all the things that we try to do in this process is get that CEQA exemption. So no CEQA documents like an MND, a mitigated negative declaration, or an environmental impact report would be required. So then once the commission accepts the report, I just want to reiterate how important these are. They are evidence on record that the building is significant or isn't. So I have a lot of people who've had these done in the early 2000s, and they come back and they're like, what do you mean that report said my building was historic? I just thought that was something so I could do my project. I was like, this is evidence on record. You're historic, and it goes forever. We keep them all. And so when you accept them, just keep in mind that it's not something that gets retracted. And they are really important documents. And we base all of the historic, when we designate something, it's based on evidence on record, not typically if the owner likes it or wants it. We try to do it very fact-based. And after the public hearing, we get the final submittals. It's really important that the consultants also submit a copy to the Gledhill Library and the Central Coast Information Center. So this is documented in other places for the public to read. If it's significant, it's automatically added to our inventory so we can comply with the secret requirement to evaluate any alterations to eligible buildings. And it comes under HLC jurisdiction. And the CEQA determination is always made prior to project design approval. So phase 1 and phase 2, we made it really clear they're never put together. The phase 1, historic significance. Phase 2 is project impacts, analyzed to the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic resources. And then we go into format and content. And I think one of the big things that I think will really help the commission and staff, and all staff, is having a little historic summary at the very beginning that just gives the basics, like what was the determination of the designation or the status, the year constructed, the architect, and the style. So we often have to look through to page 20 to find all that. And we're like making agendas and putting things. So it will be great to have that like a little cheat sheet on the front. And then pretty much all the other details are what you see now. Previous studies talk about the environment, the area, the physical setting, the landscape, and then we really want the descriptions to go into height, shape, roof, cornice, wall, windows, chimney, and significant accessory structures in that order, because this is the order that goes to the National Register, and we'd like, if people do have these and then later they want to turn it into a National Register nomination, they have the description in a well-organized manner. We see them in all different orders now, and it's great to have it all concise and consistent. And then all the other things that they need to discuss, which would be photographs, context, the architectural history, architects, people, events, and then go through the designation criteria, and then the historic integrity with the conclusion. And we're excited. Just a note on integrity, we require an analysis to be, if there is a condition that they did illegal work without permits, we analyze it to that condition before that work was done. That way, people do not think doing unpermitted work on a historic resource is a way to count it as not historic. So just change those windows and then you won't have a historic building anymore, is what we're trying not to encourage. Then we have determining the impacts. We really encourage people not to do the project impact analysis for larger projects until after an HLC concept review, because lots of times the project changes a lot based on your comments on a project. And we don't want them to have to write the phase 2 report and then have to rewrite it. So it's better if there's more consensus between the applicant team and HLC on an approvable project. And then there's 4 levels of impacts for CEQA. The goal, if you want a CEQA exemption, is you need to meet class 3 or 4. And those would meet the Secretary Treatment of Historic Resources, I can't say it anymore, without any recommendations or mitigation measures. So if the report says this is not a negative impact as long as you do this and this and this, well, that's a mitigation measure and you're stuck in an EIR. You got to work with them ahead before the report comes and make it sure it's all in the project description. And then the other, if it's class 1 or 2, you are in a negative declaration or environmental impact report. If a project changes after this phase 2 is accepted, they need to submit an addendum to reevaluate the revisions again. So that's, again, why we really like to have them a little bit later. And sometimes really minor changes can be accepted by the architectural historian, and more significant changes will come back to HLC along with the project. Demolition, when I came to Santa Barbara, there was a strong belief in the community that you could demolish a structure of merit while taking pictures of it and get a CEQA exemption. And that has been proven by a very big court case that no, you cannot do that. It is not a CEQA exemption. You have to go through the full EIR for any demolition of any building that is eligible for historic designation. So I just want to reiterate that that is one of the big differences of the old MEA and the new one. And then format and content of phase 2 is the same as it is now. The only thing we reiterate is don't reiterate the whole phase 1 in the phase 2. We don't need the 20-page history in the phase 2. We have the phase 1. We just want to get right to the point. What is the project and what are the impacts? And we can always attach the phase 1 to the agendas for your reference. And sometimes we do, because sometimes the phase 1s were done years and years ago, and the phase 2s are new projects. So now I want to just go into a few things that do not qualify, that would be like a mitigation measure that in the past we have counted as CEQA exemptions, and we should not have. So that would be relocation, and this is the big house that was relocated since I've been here. They had to cut the house in half, cut off the roof, put it on a truck, and relocated it here. But that's a mitigation measure to relocate it to save it, not saving it as per the strict standards. Also, a facade retention would be a mitigation measure. This also got a CEQA exemption. This should have been an EIR. We just saved the facade of the Californian, but it was a mitigation measure for taking down the rest of the building. And some other mitigation measures that are a little less dramatic would be demolishing with required documentation like a Habs hair plan or photos, commemoration, or a physical conservation plan, which the one I can think of that we did while I was here was the bridge that had the sandstone arch underneath it. We took that sandstone and reused it in the bridge above so people could see the sandstone. But that, again, would be a mitigation measure. And then here's our consultant list we have currently. We do, once this is all adopted, we'll be sending the MEA to all the consultants on our list and letting them know they will be expected to follow the formats if they want to stay on the list. And the list is really only for creating these very specific reports. And we have a lot of historians on that list that want to stay on the list but don't really want to complete the reports. And the applicants are already overwhelmed a lot. And if we give them a list of consultants that aren't going to do this for them, we need to that's not really fair to them because they have to call everybody on the list. So we want it to be really focused, like these are people who will complete these reports as required. Just really quickly, we go back and forth with the use of historic versus historical. Historical is used by CEQA, so when we say CEQA, we have to say historical in the documents, but the City and National Park Service use historic in all our documents, so that's why we use it, especially in our ordinance, we used historic. So just...
You couldn't just do historica?
I know, it's like we went back and forth. I think I changed it back and forth 3 times, because people...
Yeah.
So we had some questions for the HLC for you to consider. One thing we're considering adding is that although it's not in our code, we think we should notice the significance section of the reports, as this might be the only time members of the community can have any input on their opinion if they think a building is historic, especially when we have demolitions. If they're not noticed, the first time a neighbor might hear that the building has been torn down is that when they get the project notice, and by then that decision has sailed. You've already decided it is. So it kind of feels that if we don't do the notice, we're not really allowing the public to participate. And we also want to put in some really clear language that we do expect the consultants to come to the meeting and have a really organized presentation, very brief, with some slides showing a few pictures and their conclusions really succinctly and what criteria it meets. So it's more visible for the benefit of the public who might not be used to seeing the long documents. Again, like a Cliff Notes to the notes. So now we would just like to have your feedback on the draft of the document and then recommend approval of the MEA update to City Council with any recommendations you may have to be added to it. And I do, we did get some public comment and questions, and I put some supporting slides for those to help support the discussion after you have had it. And I think that's it.
Okay, great.
Make it through it.
Thank you for the presentation. All right, so now let's open it up for public comment. To the room first. You have public comment?
Okay, so I do have 2 speaker slips for this item. First is Fermina Murray, and then it's Rick Clausen. So, Fermina, if you want to come on up first.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Grambine. It's very nice to be in a familiar place. As you know, I served the landmarks for 12 years. And one thing is Anthony and Robert Uli's tags are you have to switch.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, the
Thank you.
television is
that
going
was
to
just
pick
testing.
up different.
See if anyone was paying attention.
Anyway, see, you're really paying attention. This is just wonderful updates. And what I am really concerned about is there a place in the MEA for things that are already designated, like the hangars out at the airport? They're a big worry about they're falling apart. How do we, can I come forward as an applicant? There's no applicant now doing, and it's going on, demolition by neglect is what's going on now. And so is there a way in addition to the MEA where we can address already designated historic resources to say they too require historic resource report if somebody in the public has concerns about their state of condition? Is there a place? That's really my concern. Is could I come forward and bring a phase 1, phase 2 report about something that is already designated, and how is that? Could there be a section in this MEA that that concerns mitigation and demolition section? I think it could be there, that for resources that are being demolished by neglect or by whatever can be added to the guidelines, and how a public citizen could come forward and try to mitigate that on their own, or a group of people or so. But thank you so much for this. I really appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Rick Clausen.
Commissioner Drury was the only one here when I first came in, and I thought, when I saw the reversed name tags, I thought Commissioner Uli had become the chair and he had stepped down.
Oh,
That was
I
cool.
see. The plot thickens.
You can't speak to me. I
There's
didn't
no
expect
such
to speak
plot.
at this, but I was very interested to hear the owners speak on the nomination and approval of their home as a structure of merit. As you all know, I live in a structure of merit as well. And I am vexed by the recent derailing of the historic district nomination by what I felt was an overly aggressive and uninformed opposition. And I don't know that this is the place to bring that up. I don't know that this is the document to bring that up. But as you know from what I've already sent to you, I think that I've interpreted that this may be the document where a lot of information can be imparted to people who are unsophisticated in all of what the city architectural historian outlined, but for whom they need an introduction. And if that is part of the reason for this document, it might also include more about the advantages of considering designation of your owned property as a historic resource. Because there are advantages, and it has seemed to me that in the campaign to derail the historic district I know you know what I'm talking about. There were a lot of misrepresentations and errors and misinterpretations of the way things stand, and underreporting of what are the advantages to living in and owning a historic structure.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I don't have any other speaker slips. I'm not seeing any hands raised online to speak, but I do want to acknowledge that we did receive written correspondence from Rick Clausen, which was distributed to you guys. All right, and that's closed and back to you.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so if that wraps, we'll close public comment on this item and go to the commission for questions. Commissioner Jordan.
I have questions. I also have comments, but I'll start with questions. On page 8, the draft and final reports must be submitted electronically, and it mentions photographs, maps, architectural landscape drawings, and embed all photographs, all this imagery within the body of the report. Is it possible to submit a report that includes video clips or animation? In other words, motion.
I have not experienced that. It might be a future effort. I'd have to look into that, and how we would preserve it. It does seem like the
I
way
have
the
a
future
follow-up
goes.
comment, which I'll save
who
for
knows?
comment for that. My other question deals with CEQA exemptions. On page 11, the levels of impact are identified as 4 classes, and class 3 and 4 qualify for CEQA exemptions. My question deals with class 1 impacts involve demolition. Demolition is an intentional act, but what is the situation when an environmental disaster, fire, mudslide, earthquake, results in the total destruction of a historic property or one listed on the inventory? Would that have to be treated as a class 1 impact? Would the owner then be required to replace the historic structure as it was pre-fire? What's the situation there?
Thank you. That's a really good point to bring up, and something we can definitely add. I'm prepared.
I thought you would.
So, luckily, Julia and I worked on this, and for the CEQA exemption, projects to maintain, repair, restore, demolish, or replace properties damaged or destroyed as a result of a disaster in which a state of emergency has been proclaimed. This includes projects that remove, destroy, or significantly alter historic resources when the resource represents an imminent threat to the public body harm or damage, or to an adjacent property, when the project has received or determined the State Office of Historic Preservation or section pursuant to Public Resources Code. And that I'll let Julia expand on, but you can get the CEQA exemption for that. But in our local code, we also address that. Local code says the HLC can approve the demolition of a historic resource when it's been damaged by a natural cause, when it's not reasonably practical or economically feasible to do so. But we do ask that a qualified structural engineer additionally write off that conclusion if there's some remaining, because as we know, some things, if you look at things through a historic preservation lens or someone who's not trained, that might be salvageable, especially on like our major landmarks. We'd want that. But did you want to talk about the CEQA exemption a little more?
Sure, I can expand on that. Commissioners, my name is Julia Peugeot, environmental analyst. And so if there is a declared emergency as declared by the governor, then this exemption kicks in, which is in the Public Resources Code, meaning that you are allowed to repair, rebuild, restore, even if there's a historic resource involved. If it's not a state of emergency, then what CEQA requires us to do is to look at what's there. So if we're not using this particular exemption, the site may still require an evaluation to see if there's anything that still retains significant and retain that aspect of it. But there's nothing in CEQA that requires a property owner to construct replica of what was previously there.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this, if it's a large-scale environmental disaster, as has happened in LA County recently, and there's a declaration of the state declaration, then that's one path. If it's just simply, for example, a house fire that reduces it, that's a slightly different situation. So my follow-up question is, where or how easy is it for a property owner to find that? Should it be in the MEA, or is it quickly enough, clearly enough positioned somewhere else? The point is, where does somebody get that information?
Sure. These are in the state CEQA guidelines, but also staff are aware of these guidelines
Okay.
and can help direct applicants.
Okay. That's my questions.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up on the commissioner's line of questioning, I think it's the next slide, 48. This particular citation doesn't quote a declared emergency. So it probably would work for your single fire situation where the building is determined to be unsafe or has been red tagged potentially by the building department or fire marshal, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. I've got it. I'm sorry.
All right, go ahead.
I've
Keep
got
rolling.
another one. Can you go to slide 17? I think it's on slide 17. So there was a reference to, and this happens occasionally, there was a reference to once the HLC accepts, they don't adopt it, but they accept the report making the designation. There is a process at the national level where a property can lose its designation. And so I think our rules generally say we follow their rules, but we don't have anything that says it specifically. So the example in public comment was demolition by neglect is one where the building loses its historic value because it hasn't been maintained, or it loses its historic value because somebody changed something without getting permission. So the building could lose its designation, and HLC could take an action to remove its designation in a public hearing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's somewhat mischaracterized when it says it's forever. It's not forever. It's forever until it's been taken away.
Yeah, and that would probably be through another report.
Yeah.
That would evaluate what the evidence on record in the first report has been sacrificed
Yeah.
and no longer, and why it doesn't work anymore.
Commissioner Levick?
I had a question along those same lines. You referred to a report that may have been written 10, 15 years ago. Someone purchases a home or a building, is not aware of that, but becomes aware as he wants to do something, and and it's of a concern to him. Doesn't the current governing body, landmarks in this case, doesn't it have the ability to review a prior action and find reach a different conclusion?
I would say so.
In other words, someone,
Relitigate.
Well, I think
Yeah.
we usually do things through an appeal process and only a limited time, so people can't undo previous motions. But
Yeah,
these aren't even, these CEQA reports aren't even appealable. So I think you would have to come up with another expert's.
Oh, I agree.
Do a different argumentation.
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
I agree.
they would have to submit another report with the expertise.
Just to clarify, I'm sorry, just to clarify your questioning, I think, and we see this so many times, 20 years ago, it was a one-page memo that said this is important, and somebody took action and put it on a list or designated it. Now it's a 20-page memo that goes into the detail and the specifics and the who's and the what and the where to help us make a firm designation. So if someone got a designation because it was a 3-paragraph memo and they questioned it it could be reevaluated, right? and
Yes.
before-
Yes, and I think we did a lot of that a few years ago when we had 700 buildings on the inventory, and we were going through those and relooking at them with a new report. So I would bring them to you, and some of them you were like, we don't feel this warrants staying on the inventory, and that would have been a 30-year look. It had been 30 years since they'd been looked at. Most of them were designated or remained on the list, but some were removed, but we had the evidence on record, so that could be
we just kind of say that, that basically the only way that, or at least as the way we've practiced it, the only way that HLC findings can be reversed is if there's sort of new information or via a new report, via finding out that whatever the short, and I think we've gotten rid of most of the problem issues when we did that whole clean out. But there might still be some on that where we still found it, but it wasn't a deep dive. And if they do a deep dive, they find that it wasn't that, or, there's new information. But it seems like the way we've, at least in practice, done it is we don't just reevaluate the same report and come to a different conclusion. There really should be
New evidence.
New evidence or different, yeah.
Yes, an updated
And that
report.
can come from a different historian or it can come from the same historian.
Exactly, and it can go the other way as well, especially the national dream, I call it a dream, but they say it's the best practice is to resurvey buildings every 10 years because perspectives change. I mean, I think a lot of things that some people did not think were significant 40 years ago, we would now for different reasons. So it could go either way, but it can be reevaluated. It's just, they'll both go on record, just to keep that in mind.
Mr. Chair.
And if I may add to that, to the commission, the example that Ms. Hernandez used was really, an applicant realizing that their home had been deemed significant at one point in time and is on the inventory now. I think when these reports come to you in phase one, if your action is to deem it insignificant, I think it's a really powerful thing to have because, again, as it was mentioned, it's the evidence on record at that point. And so sometimes there's a lag before a project actually comes in. And so I think, there's evidence to look back on this, but we have to be considerate of timing and when projects come. And if one of the reasons we're requesting public notice for certain things like demolition is because if the public doesn't know about something and it was deemed insignificant by this board or this commission, but then later on, it's like, wait a minute, if we would have known, we would have had a lot more conversation about this. So I think we just want to be really conscious of, you all are always conscious of your decisions, but really trying to, hopefully we're coming in with the consultants are coming in with the best information available. And, but we can't be glib about these particular reports because of the potential development in the future.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Commissioner Lembeck?
Yes, one other thing that and maybe I'm confused, but there's nothing that prevents a designated structure, nor a structure of merit, from having exterior changes made to it. Am I correct?
Our ordinance, we won't permit permits if they're doing alterations that are not approved. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm simply saying that if there is a building which has a structure of merit designation, that's different than a landmarks designation. And the ability to change or do anything to a landmark is almost impossible on the exterior. Whereas if you brought in a structure of merit and said, I really want to take and move that window over 4 feet, it'll be the same window, but it'll be, it'll accommodate whatever. There's nothing to prevent us from allowing that to happen as long as we can make findings, so on and so forth.
Well, you have to meet the Secretary of Interior standards.
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't meet the Secretary of Interior standards.
I don't think that, even though it's maybe by practice, because landmarks are so rare in terms of the number compared to general historic resources, that but we're tougher on them just in practice, but there actually isn't a specific rule, one that is differentiating like landmark versus historic resources. But I think we just are more about, usually they're at a better quality and they're more integrity, and so it's more about kind of trying to keep it as much as possible. But in theory, the same things can be done. We recommend doing it towards the back or the less important facades.
The big difference is with a structure of merit, you could alter and demolish with a negative declaration or environmental impact report. You'd have to go through that process.
Sure.
The landmarks, our ordinance says, no, you cannot do that.
Exactly.
Even if you get your CEQA, it doesn't matter, we supersede the CEQA in our landmarks. We're not doing that.
One other thing that I think is confusing to people, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but the designation of a structure of merit, by and large, is a recognition thing, as opposed to something which is more solid and
A control thing.
a control thing.
Honorarium.
Pardon me?
It's more like an honorarium.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there are benefits to it, and there are some negatives, but it's an honorarium. It's a recognition thing. And if you have a whole series of buildings in a block or a neighborhood that are designated as structures of merit, or they're a cottage district, some of them aren't in there. They're not recognized as being contributing. But now we have a district which isn't a district because there was some objection. And that doesn't waive the requirement that if someone who wants to remodel their 75-year-old house gets away free. I mean, there's no difference between the requirements of review of a 75-year-old house which is not designated and a structure of merit next door which is designated. I mean, the review process is the same, right?
It would just, on a little bit on that, just to sort of, a little bit of nuance, assuming that that same building, the 75-year-olds, would be a contributing member, so it doesn't have to be, it's a historic resource in that it's on the inventory, but it's not a historic structure of merit.
Right.
And so and they're gonna still go through the same review process.
Exactly.
They're still-
Yes,
and
that
then
is CEQA, we treat them the same. You're correct.
So the neighbors in that got the city council to say, no, we're not gonna allow a cottage, neighborhood, they haven't gained anything big because they are still over 50 years old and are going to be reviewed, and maybe have to have a phase one or whatever,
Yes.
They're still gonna have to
That's
deal with
correct. I was
it.
going to say, and it, whether you're in a potential historic district, which we have certain ones that have been surveyed here in the city, or if you're not, if you're outside of that, if your building is 50 years or older, it will be evaluated by, it will come in for an evaluation, and then at that point, it's determined, what are you doing? Or is this something that will go to be by the architectural historian to be evaluated, or is there going to be something that needs the qualified professional?
Well, I hope that the application for that district doesn't go away, but that there's more education provided to the neighbors who objected, because I don't think that there is anything that harms them by being in that district versus not being
Mr.
in it.
Chair, I
We
think
don't
it's a
wanna vary
little
out.
bit
I think we're
outside the
going-
scope of the
yeah,
conversation.
But you look at.
But I understand that.
But you look at this document, the MEA document, and you become terrorized. And that's the unfortunate part. You become, well, if I gotta go through all that, then obviously I'm gonna have a problem.
Yeah, so, okay, so, bringing it back to, or bringing it more to the MEA as well, I would just say, a question to, Ms. Hernandez, if you can go through any other, responses to public comments that you've had, points that you want to make as well, just as we're kind of,
I've got two more.
okay, and then we'll keep going with this, because it might be answered in some of those too. So I think that might be helpful, just kind of get it all out there in terms of discussion and then additional questions. And then we can see if we can converge on what we want to do from there.
Thanks. Make sure I'm starting at the top here. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to go, some of the questions I had in the public comments and questions provided by Commissioner Ensberg. Qualified professional staff in historic preservation. I think there was the question of could the title of the position be changed to historian instead of architectural historian? We went through this extensively in 2020 with our human resources because the position requires extensive training in architectural history because of the architectural styles, as well as reading plans daily to help applicants. It is an architectural historian position. A historian, not all historians have experience or even know how to read plans or know anything about architectural styles. So that's where the name comes from, and it, this is the definition taken out of our ordinance. And in the ordinance, it's referred to as architectural historian. So we do that for consistency. And a continued, we also have minimal professional qualifications for the position, meeting the same standards that the Secretary of Interior has. So I just wanted to clarify that question.
May I add to that, Ms. Hernandez, is that this was a really large component. This was slightly before my time as supervisor in design review, but this was a really big component to creating the historic resource ordinance because it was embedded in the thinking of this commission and this community that rather than just having any staff person be able to do this, we actually have a city architectural historian on our staff to be able to do these types of things. So it was, again, it's embedded in our, this is municipal code language, or at least the previous slide is. And yes, these are the specific qualifications to ensure that there is a qualified individual. And again, Ms. Hernandez reviews structures on a weekly basis, and often is doing the reporting to save homeowners money, and or when it's something that can be done in house and having that specific expertise. If we didn't have that, there are other communities, even the county, if I'm correct, farm out everything is done by a consultant, and nothing is necessarily done in-house. So we really do try to help out homeowners, and that's why we're so conscious of if the HLC disagrees with the city's architectural historian on an evaluation, we just want to let you all know that we try to be just to understand the costs associated with this. So a lot of these come with larger projects, but a lot of the single-family residences we try to do in-house. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a couple.
Do you want to
Can I-
ask about that one? 'Cause
could
that
I
was
please-
coming from me. Sure.
Thank you. And I hope that you didn't take that, I didn't mean it in any kind of derogatory way. I was kind of responding to the letter that we got from Mr. Clausen about, people thinking, oh yeah, a landmark, it's a building. I was more wondering, the messaging, that we understand your qualifications and how important all of that is, but how do we also have it be very, very clear in our education that it isn't just buildings that we're talking about. So that was the reason why I was suggesting or kind of following up with that. And if it has to be that way, that's fine. Maybe you leave it that way, but maybe you could add something more to it or somehow, to get that across, that people understand that it's not just buildings. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just a quick follow. I think in future updates, if we use cultural landscapes or resources, because a broader term means buildings, objects, landscaping, living things, so it's not just architectural history, right? I mean.
Yeah, and we do have, by charter, we have a landscape architect on our board to help us with that expertise. And we often work behind the scenes with the landscape architect on minor projects. And we have since I've been here. It's just, we really rely on their expertise, and it is acknowledged in our charter as well.
And Chair, if I could just add one
sure.
more little thing onto that, is that I wonder, we know all these things, or some of them, most of them anyway, or we try to, but the public doesn't. And so, I don't know, and maybe someone knows, Like when somebody comes to town and they say, oh, this is a great place, I like this place, and I'm going to buy this house, and they buy the house, and then they decide they want to do all this stuff to the house, and then they come in, it's like 50 years old, and it's like, oh, well, you don't get to do anything to the house. So then they get all upset. Is there any way to, like, I would suppose like realtors would maybe include things about the history of the house, possibly, if it was of some kind of advantage, but it's not necessarily, how do we educate? How do people, and I see Commissioner Jordan maybe can help with this.
I think that's totally out of our scope. An owner should do their due diligence.
Due diligence was what I was going to say. I will also say on this topic, I happen to have a PhD in the history of architecture. There is a disciplinary expertise. It may or may not be recognized by the general public. It is recognized by local, state, and national boards. And that's what we have to meet. And I would be, I think I am quite comfortable with the term architectural historian, and I think that that includes more than the term historian includes. There is an additional disciplinary expertise that, again, local, state, and national boards recognize. And that's what we have to meet when you're writing documents like this. The public education part of it is a separate problem, but in terms of writing the documents, it has to meet those kinds of standards.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, and to the commission, I just want to acknowledge all of the work that Ms. Hernandez does. And oftentimes real estate agents do call you on a weekly basis to say, oh my gosh, I'm selling this property. What's the deal with it? And so you're able to pull all the information together. We often have information there, or it can be quickly evaluated to say, oh yes, this would be, so that that people can have a sense of that information, and what we have on file, is publicly available. So people can do their due diligence. But you do a lot of the heavy lifting early on, or especially when we hear about other, something in the news that comes up. Ms. Hernandez is very proactive in being able to reach out to those new property owners to be like, FYI, I just want to let you know you do have a historic resource. So if you do have something in mind, here's all the information on this. This is what you'll be required to do. And again, it kind of sets the tone for what to expect so that there aren't any surprises. And again, that's another reason just why the survey work is so critically important. I know at the very beginning of this meeting, we talked about the San Roque survey, because rather than being reactionary, someone comes in, we tell you what you're going to have to do. You had a dream in mind that's different from what might be acceptable by the Secretary of the Interior standards. But no, we're being proactive. We're saying, okay, here's a potentially historic resource. We'll add it to the inventory. Whether you want to choose to pursue a structure of merit, that's another thing. But or no, this is not historic. So go ahead. If anything, you may or may not be subject to single-family design board, depending on what you're proposing to do. So that's a proactive approach. The survey work is very proactive in that regard. So, I mean, really, Ms. Hernandez is coming at it from all angles on a daily basis.
Yep.
In my dream, everything surveyed, so I did not have to tell people that they are not going to get that dream house on this historic resource. But it is the way CEQA works. Let's see, just a few other. I wanted to talk a little bit about more where we recognize cultural landscapes and how it's defined, and we can add more to this document to make it clear so that the consultants are addressing this. But it is defined, and there are sections on it in our historic resources element as well. This is exactly how it's written in the definition in our element and the ordinance. They're both address cultural landscapes, and that we do have policies in our historic resources element to protect these resources, preserve and protect historic features such as, trees, stone curbing, hitching posts, and sidewalk imprints even. Identify and designate cultural landscape features is part of our historic resource as element policy as well. So adding more indication to add those elements on the scope is appropriate. And it when it comes to street tree protection and guidelines on how to do that, if you were looking at something like that in a phase 2, most of our guidance comes from our street tree ordinance. So we look at that for guidance. That's where it really is all laid out. And this is where it talks about how a historic tree is defined. And I think the question is, who is maintaining these? Especially, it's pretty clear when it's a building, it's the owner. But what about trees in the right of way? And this becomes, it can be the responsibility owner unless the director of Parks and Rec complies with pruning standards, and they have standards they're supposed to follow. And I think dictating maintenance is not something that CEQA is part of. It's not, CEQA doesn't say you have to adopt a maintenance plan. I think maintenance plans are some of the most critical things for both houses, walls, anything we do, and cultural landscapes. They all need to be maintained. And I don't know how we might look into seeing if we can add something like you're going to be required to include a maintenance plan, but I can work with Julia on some of those, because I think as the public comment talked about, what about maintenance plans and how are they addressed? Now, CEQA doesn't really address demolition by neglect or how to do enforcement. We do address that in our ordinance. We do have something that says you can be, it can be almost a criminal misdemeanor to do demolition by neglect. But really buffing up the enforcement side, which is in our ordinance, would be the way to do that rather than the CEQA document, I think.
Although, through the chair, it wouldn't make it exempt, but a maintenance plan could be a condition or a mitigation to
Right.
it. So it
That's
would
what I was
become an MND or something. It wouldn't be exempt, but you could require a maintenance plan through the environmental process.
Right. And then I
Does-
think, again, the enforcement is where we.
Along those lines, is that something that would need to get integrated into this document if it was to become teeth, or is it just something that can be done as, because I know that in the past, when we are making findings for things, we can make requirements of acceptance of design or whatever, and have certain requirements of it that are not necessarily picking from an exact list or something like that, but that we add in saying you have to do this, and then we're accepting this. Does that, how would or would that not be able to be played into the CEQA side of things?
I'm not sure, and I don't know
Because
if
we don't
Julia
really
knows.
see
but
those,
no.
that's
Right.
outside of.
I mean, we do have it in our ordinance that all historic resources must be maintained in good condition. So
Mm-hmm.
we have the enforcement power to go after them if they're not. That usually comes because of public complaint.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the public can come in, submit an enforcement case, and we'll send the inspectors out there and start,
Busting
working
down
that
doors.
through that angle. That's where our teeth come in.
Gotcha.
Thank you. So for using the public comment as an example, you would go across the hall and knock on the door of the department that's responsible to maintain that and say, hey, what's going on?
It's really, that would be ideal, or you could just go and file a complaint.
Yeah.
You can file it online. That's the way they like to have them, and then they'll send an inspector out to do it. And when it's another city department, we are trying to figure that out.
Yeah, well, we've had experience with that, haven't we?
Ellen and I, we know.
I think if, it's a tricky situation, and I think that, we hear the comment, and we will share that
Continue to work on it.
information.
And then, Ms. Peugeot, did you?
I was only going to add that where the maintenance plan might come in is if there's an environmental document like an MND or an EIR, and that's added as a mitigation measure. And so if there is a permit or a project decision or action that the city's taking, and it's studied and it's determined, hey, we need to have this maintenance plan to make sure that this resource is maintained and preserved for the long term, that can be included or based on the recommendation of the qualified professional, and then that becomes a condition of the project. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be something addressed in these MEA guidelines. It can be addressed through the project process. for when those
So-
situations come
So
up.
it could be a mitigation measure in an MND or an EIR.
Yes.
Or it could be one of the conditions of the approval of the project outside of the environmental document. Yeah.
Yes, those mitigation measures then are turned into conditions of approval.
I understand.
That's the process.
Okay,
right, thank
great.
I still have a couple, I don't
Okay.
know,
Does
Mr.
that
Hernandez,
cover
if you're
everything?
through.
That covers everything I
Okay.
had.
I just had a couple of things I wanted to highlight. One, about the disagreement of experts. So, of course, we have an expert on staff, and we have consulting experts. And I think what you said was, if in the discussion, negotiation of the expert and HLC, if we're unable to meet in the middle of the road,
Come to an agreement of some sort.
come to some agreement about whatever the report findings suggested, that it automatically triggers deeper environmental review. I think that's what, I'm paraphrasing. I didn't write the slide number down, I'm sorry.
Got it.
But it is possible, and I think we've done this in the past, it is possible in discussions with that expert for us to come to resolution and avoid
Yes.
a deeper environmental document.
Yes, we have done that.
Yeah.
We have done that a lot and worked, and it's, the consultant agrees, like,
Yeah.
some of the issues we've had are on some really, like integrity, like
Gray
we were,
area.
you know, it was on the fence anyway, and so the discussion of the 9 with the consultant, you can all come to a consultant, and I've seen that several times, and that's why often they come back when you can say, we approve this with the conditions, and we'll continue it and approve it when those are added.
So our goal is to stay in the exempt, if we're looking at a Venn diagram, our goal is to stay in the exempt bubble. Hopefully not get into the MND bubble, and totally avoid the EIR bubble, if I'm characterizing it.
I think that would be what the applicants would
Well,
hope
yeah,
for.
because it means less money.
Yeah.
And time. All right. My next one, I think slide 27, I just wanted to point out a nuance about this. CEQA, I believe, looks for projects that are eligible, not designated.
Right.
It's the health and safety code that determines if something is eligible for that to trigger. It's the same thing the building code uses as the health and safety code, if something is eligible and not designated. So the fact that something is on the list, structure of merit or landmark is irrelevant to CEQA because it only has to be eligible. All right.
That's correct. That's why we keep the list, and that's what's confusing to, I think that's the part that's confusing to the public. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not designated, but CEQA.
Or even on the list.
Or even, you haven't even been evaluated yet, but CEQA triggers that, and that is a confusing part of,
And you just have to be a half a century or older
right.
for that to trigger, which
That's
I
it.
think
So I'm
all of
starting to
us
look
are.
at 1975 buildings this year.
There was nothing good in
Yeah, we're all eligible. And the last one is the MEA is project-driven. It's not, it doesn't just stand by itself and do anything. Projects drive this thing. You have a project, it needs to meet those standards. Right?
Correct.
If I may, and it's a little bit more nuanced, it's a discretionary project. So anything, a discretionary project is something that needs some kind of planning entitlement, like design review or a land use approval. So that's the difference between a ministerial project. We're not dealing with this stuff because it goes to, straight to building permit.
Yeah.
But in order to catch all of the nuances, because a lot of things we won't catch, and then we'll see that the building department signed off on like replacement of all these amazing windows of a building we all know would qualify but has never been evaluated. We put in the ordinance when we redid it in 2021 that everything over 50 years old, if they're doing major alterations visible from the public right of way, they send it for the evaluation. So we went a little above and beyond that in the ordinance. to really, and alteration of character defining features. So, we're not gonna, so that way, if somebody does come in to change out all their windows, that wouldn't be normally a discretionary item, but they'll send it to me and I'll do the evaluation, just so we can prevent the loss of fabric right under our eyes.
All right.
That's all I had.
Okay.
I've got a comment
Any other questions? And otherwise, let's roll into discussion. I do want to notice that we are behind. Although I guess that the next item will have at least some of the stuff is are just MEA discussions. Any other questions before we roll into just discussion of it?
Comments.
Questions before we roll into comments / discussion. And I would say the other, I think there was the other question put before us, this is being asked, if maybe we can go to the slide or two of what's being asked of us. Yeah.
There were two of them.
Yeah.
Noticing and the report presentation.
Yeah. Yes, there we go. Thanks. So I guess that this would be also one from the commission to the commission, what we're thinking as well as part of this. If we're supporting this, noticing a requirement for historic resources report. And maybe as a little tie to that, is there, just a quick question, is that include a lot of or additional resource, or is it just a timing thing more than not? Is that a great add in terms of?
Staff time or?
Yeah, staff time or resources, right?
This is part of our regular process for our mailed notice, so there is a 10-day window. So in terms of scheduling at a hearing, there's a little consideration, but this is normal process, and there would be a small mailed noticing fee to the applicant, but it's pretty insignificant. But I think the benefit to the community is quite large.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, I support both of those recommendations. I think the more that we can be transparent about what is going on and communicate what this body reviews, the better. It might, I don't know, on the flip side, if we don't do it, nobody's really stormed the room complaining about stuff. Well, we just put them on notice, I guess. Nobody's really stormed the room, but I do support both recommendations.
Okay, great.
I do as well.
Okay. Yeah, does that seem pretty universal
Yes.
across, everyone
Yes.
is in support of that? Okay, great. That is easy. So then now let's go roll into comments, and let's see what, especially with converging on where we're going with this.
I'll try to keep my comments brief, and they actually apply to the next item as well, because they deal mostly with language. Recent experiences suggest that we need to be very sensitive and clear about landscapes and cultural landscapes. And public comment from Mr. Clausen brought a number of those issues to the foreground. Remind you, commissioners, we recently recommended a kind of continuing education course on cultural landscapes. It's actually a very good course because it gives you a typology and a language for doing that. So I would just recommend or encourage whoever winds up having to write this to be sensitive and inclusive about that language. My other comment deals with electronic documents, and that currently the electronic documents we receive for review are basically traditional print documents that were created using a word processor and software that allows you to insert images and hyperlinks. They are the mirror image of a print document. Can we envision, or I think we should envision, so-called digitally born documents that include motion graphics and animation, not necessarily required, but allowed if the applicant wants to do so? And the issue there is, I suggest that at a minimum, we avoid creating a document, guidelines, or procedures that inhibit innovation in how applicants can satisfy requirements. And I think the writing strategy there is just to be, again, sensitive to the language of minimum requirements, that you say something is a minimum requirement, but you can go beyond it at this stage. That's it.
All right, great, thank you. Other comments?
Totally agree.
All right.
Yes, Chair Grumbine, thank you.
Yeah.
I agree very much with Commissioner Dordan's comments. I just have a couple other things to add, I hope. That I think what I come away with this is that what we're really trying to do is to educate and to be clear, to make it clear, to avoid conflict. And to have people, have the community and everyone understand what is the benefit. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? And that's why I think several said to, maybe have that sort of little summary at the very beginning, just to further, I know you do, but I mean, just to think about that and just have it really be underscored. And the other things are that, as we have been talking about, is that this can include, like special districts. We've talked about that a little bit. It can be gardens. It can be a street, like Lombard Street in San Francisco, as an example. It could be garden walls, or it can be details. But it can be big things that aren't buildings. It could be a garden, for example, or like Central Park in New York. So I just think it's really important that that be very clear, that we're not just talking about buildings. It could be much, much more than that. And that I think in our earlier discussion, maybe it was Commissioner Uli that brought it up, that, architecture is a very broad endeavor. We have to deal with all kinds of things to create a big thing that incorporates many things. So I think that would be really important for the public to understand the complexity of all of this. And then finally, this just kind of underscores this idea of a department for historic preservation in our town, so that we could have Nicole, Miss Hernandez could have maybe a staff person at this point. There could be more than just Nicole Hernandez doing this work, and that we can really focus on how important it is. But thank you for all this work. It's so important, and I brought this today just to kind of share. This is the
Do you
book.
want to pass it?
Yeah, this is a book of 100 years.
City TV, if we can get a...
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Well, I was very gratified to see that one of those paragraphs had cultural landscapes in it. That just puts it in like we're supposed to be. And it gets kind of microscopic in terms of sidewalk imprints. There's a whole history of those imprints in Santa Barbara. The people that made the sidewalks and stamped their stamps on it. I think that's an inventory that you probably got going anyway, right? I'm assuming. You don't have to.
That's why she needs a department.
But I mean, it's like the stone walls. It's like, it's all part of that fabric. And I think that certainly it would be an education for me if that happened.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Great, Commissioner Drury.
I think the book.
Yeah, and actually, Commissioner Levick, you want to pass the book over? City TV, can you?
Open it up to a certain.
Yeah, can you get a shot of the desk here?
There's a beautiful painting. By Commissioner Drury.
Stunning.
What page are we on?
No idea.
Okay. All right. So here's that. Whoops. Commissioner. All right. Ensberg brought this. Great. All of our parks. 100 years of city parks. So now that it's been shown here, it's going to become a hot commodity.
Yeah. There's 10
Buy
left.
yours now.
There's 10 left.
And
There it is.
oh, there we go. Is that, yep, I recognize your hand. Beautiful. That by our very own Commissioner Drury. All right. Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing that in, Commissioner Ensberg. All right. Okay. So to the commission, I guess the question is, they want to requesting a recommendation to the City Council to approve the updates of the MEA guidelines for historic resources, and then also it's sounding like we are also agreeing with the recommendations by staff for noticing and for what was it? Whatever the other one was. The two recommendations from staff. Is there anything?
Presenting the report.
Oh yeah. What's that?
Presenting the report live.
Oh yeah, presenting the report live with the architecture historian to come and present it. So
Or consultant.
Yeah,
slash
consultant. Yeah, slash consultant. So is there anything else that we're wanting to have adjusted before we send, or with this motion as well? Or how do we want to send this on? Is there anything else? Sounding like all the things have been sort of answered and commented and defined, and at least the discussion's been started for some of the other ones that will need to be answered in other ways. But is there anything else in this document that we want changed before we are sending it on?
Chair Grumman, I promise 2 seconds,
Okay.
really. The other thing is, I wanted to say that I think it's really important that not only significant architects be mentioned, but also landscape architects, and also, designers, builders, artisans, important people like that, I think should be on the upfront top list, not sort of, the architect's this, and then included sort of in the summary below. I think if it's a significant person, that should be right up front, including the landscape people, landscape architects.
All right.
No, I
Well,
think
not
that's-
anymore.
Not anymore.
Mr. Chair,
All right.
it seems to me with the purpose of the MEA, it seems to be well-structured. And I like the fact that that staff have stripped out all the extra stuff that really distracts from the purpose of the document, which I think is good. I don't think anything really needs to be added to it. I mean, you've got the checklist, you've got a pretty straightforward process. So if there isn't any driving need to change the document, I would move that we recommend that it be forwarded to City Council for approval with the staff recommendations.
And as well as with the significant, the additional comment by Commissioner Ansberg for the significant people to be included in the top summary.
Well, it's has a category for important people. I mean, you have the architect, and there's a heading for
I can
significant
add,
people.
It won't be hard to add, just for
Okay.
clarity.
But I just want that.
For the
because-
council
well,
one.
in case that the people look at the document that was submitted to us today, and then that changed. So is that change okay? Or
Yeah.
that with that additional note? And then the seconder?
Yes.
Okay with that? Okay.
And-
Commissioner Ansberg?
Thank you, Chair. So we're not talking, I agree, we're not talking about major rehaul or anything. I mean, it's really
just
good.
a
It's
little
excellent what you have. We've just kind of gone through and suggested a few little emphasis here and there. I think that's what we're talking about, and
Yeah.
just some simple things that could just further what you've already done so well. And then, as Commissioner Uli says, just go with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
and
Thank
we
you.
will do
Great.
some minor,
Yeah.
the minor edits.
All right. Then, so we have a first and seconder with those additional notes, and then any other discussion? All right. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Okay, Commissioner Jordan,
Yes.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes?
Commissioner Butler, Commissioner Lenvik,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you for that great work. All right, and now we're on to the last item, and this will probably go faster than this last one because of a lot of the similar stuff. So this is
Move that we're recommended, no.
all right, we're on to item 4, MEA guidelines on archaeological resources. This is requesting a staff presentation on updates to the master environmental assessment guidelines pertaining to archaeological resources. So this is requesting recommendation to City Council to approve the updates to the MEA guidelines for archaeological resources. All right, so welcome. If you could introduce yourselves for the record. And then we will go into if you can do your presentation.
Thank you. Chair Grumbine and Commissioners, my name is Julia Peugeot, City Environmental Analyst. And we are here today, we are excited to share the draft guidelines for archaeological resources. And we are looking for your recommendation to City Council for adoption of these guidelines. The reason we are taking them here today alongside with the historical resources guidelines is that because currently they are shared under one cover, And with our proposed guidelines, we are proposing 2 separate covers, and we would like to take them to council at the same time. And so these guidelines are our guidelines to help identify, evaluate, and manage the treatment of archaeological resources. And in doing so, the city continues our legacy of stewardship of these important resources and the cultural significance that they contain. Importantly, in these MEA guidelines, we are for the first time also recognizing tribal cultural resources, which in many ways is long overdue, and recognizing that many archaeological resources are also tribal resources in nature. So that is an added component. And then also separately, the city staff and our consultant are drafting tribal cultural resource guidelines, and those guidelines are currently being reviewed by tribal representatives. This process has been a very collaborative process. We've engaged with our consultant, David Stone, as well as to prepare these guidelines to make sure that they meet professional standards and that they also meet our local needs. And then we've also formed a working group of professionals, archaeologists in the community. We have 6 individuals who have participated in this working group who have volunteered their time to provide input and review these guidelines. One of them is in the audience today, Miss Heather Daniel McDevitt. We've also have been coordinating with tribal representatives on these guidelines. And Dr. Glassow, the city archaeological advisor, is also part of that working group. I had a conversation with Dr. Glassow this morning, and he gave me permission to share that he endorses these guidelines and recommends that he supports them and recommends them for adoption and approval. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our consultant, Mr. Stone.
Welcome, Dr. Stone.
Thank you. Chair Grumbine, Vice Chair Uli, today. I'm pleased to be here. It seems like I was just here yesterday, but you weren't. We're going to, go ahead, Julia. I think you're going to have the power to do this. I've been working with the MEA since 1986. That doesn't make me the oldest archaeologist, or really the oldest archaeologist to work with the MEA, but I have seen evolution over quite a long time. I wanted to point out that we spell archaeology with an A and not an E. It's not, as opposed to historic and historical. It's just very, very important. But since 2002, there's been a lot of projects that you've seen and many that you haven't. We've seen, archaeologists such as myself have prepared over 1,100 investigations since 2002. So our database for understanding the way in which all types of archaeological sites are located throughout the city has become much more sophisticated and refined. And that's what we're trying to do here. And what we have done is integrate those results into our understanding of where archaeological sites from different periods of time are most likely to be found, and gearing or directing the way in which Julia and the Planning Division directs archaeologists like us to carry out our work. And as Julia mentioned, there is a very substantial component to this that you're not looking at. It's the tribal cultural resource segment. CEQA has promulgated the identification of these resources, which are very similar to the cultural landscapes that you've been talking about, except that they are directed at heritage values that Native Californians hold dear and important. So that is a separate parallel effort of ours, but one of the things that these revisions do reflect is integration with local Chumash bands much more formally and consistently. So the other very, very major thing is, and I'm going to try to share with you very, very briefly, is that we have changed what are called sensitivity zones. They were called sensitivity areas before, in which archaeological sites are considered to be most likely to occur. And I'll just share that with you. We've done some very, very in the weeds types of revisions as to how reports are prepared, making them more concise and more linear, more expeditious. We definitely, as you have mentioned in this previous item, are concerned about the way in which our revisions are affecting the public, the land use consultants, and we generally are trying to make the process more expedient and sympathetic as your concerns have voiced. So we'll just go on with the next slide. I've been tasked to get through this in 10 minutes. Now, I want to let you know that this was a large document. I don't know if you put it underneath your pillow at night and hope to absorb it, but this was actually my suggestion. There is an Appendix A, you could take it home with you, that actually explains the revisions of the MEA and the justifications for those revisions, and I'm going to lean into those quite a bit. So as you can see here, this is a tabular summary of the key components that are included in our update. One of the most exciting or sad aspects of the MEA, depending upon how you are going to decide upon this, is that consistent with city charter, and Julia's here to correct me if I stray off the rails here, a city charter directs that the HLC would look at archaeological reports where there is a known resource, archaeological resource, or one that has been identified during the process of investigation. So we are promulgating, formalizing that city charter language such that you will not be seeing in the future myself and other archaeologists who have conducted a phase 1 report, phase 1 investigation that has failed to identify a significant resource. So that might be cause for celebration, or like I said. So anyway, we'll go to the next slide.
So that might eliminate one or two occurrences where we see you and don't see you.
Well, Vice Chair Uli, in all seriousness, you're not seeing as many phase 1 reports as you have perhaps even 5 years ago. So thank you for the lead in. This gets into how to deal with projects that are of minor development nature, minor ground disturbance and potential for impacting archaeological sites. There's a more expanded treatment of what we call a letter report confirming no archaeological resources. Otherwise, we call that a letter report. And it is more perfunctory, it is more expeditious, it's more cost-effective, if you will, and we have expanded the utility of those in certain situations where the amount of ground disturbance is minimal and therefore has a much less likelihood of encountering resource. So yes, you will see me less. I'll somehow have to make it up somehow. Okay, so anyway, we'll just go ahead with the next slide here. So as Julia pointed out, tribal cultural resources have been defined very, very specifically under CEQA now. It's in what's Appendix G, which is the checklist for potential impacts that can affect the environment and require investigation. And tribal cultural resources has their own category. So what archaeologists have done traditionally and will continue to do is engage appropriate tribal band representatives to understand the way in which they consider a particular project having the potential to affect their heritage values. So we have included in the MEA a process which will expand the scope and potentially the time of phase 1 reports where tribal cultural resources are potentially involved. Those resources understandably involve prehistoric archaeological sites, but what we have heard from working with tribal representatives is it may actually include even other projects in historic periods, historic sensitive zones, and they want to be given the opportunity to consult with us informally for those types of projects as well. And that process is involved, explained in Appendix F. Monitoring mitigation, we've refined the standard conditions that would be applied in the event that monitoring during ground disturbances is required. We've also incorporated a standard condition. It's called a Worker Education Awareness Program. Read it and weep. Oh, WEAP. So yeah, that's what they call them. So acronyms are us. In which where tribal cultural groups have identified a sensitivity, a potential sensitivity, that there be a short presentation in front of all the construction staff by an archaeologist and tribal representative before the project actually is undertaken. Let's keep moving. Okay, I'm going to go over these very quickly with you. They are not showing archaeological sites. This is very, very important to understand. You know the importance with sensitivity and confidentiality that is going to be completely maintained with the MEA. One of our partners is soon to be Dr. Brian Barbier. He is the coordinator of the Central Coast Information Center. He and his group maintain the location and documentation on all archaeological sites in Santa Barbara and San Luis counties, and he's worked with us to expand these or make them more appropriate. This prehistoric resource, perhaps you've seen it, but the lighter of the blue is the existing, the darker of the blue are areas where the sensitivity area has been expanded, and it's simply including archaeological sites that the city did not know about, and Brian Barbier has provided us. It does include some additional areas. You may remember I've been involved with projects adjacent to the former estuary near and the bird refuge, and these areas have been expanded. So let's keep going. Okay, this is the Mission Waterworks period, and you can see the removal is in the striped areas. These are areas that just were perhaps conservatively added previously, but this is the striped areas. They're near Plaza Rubio and extending up into the Riviera are areas where there are no documented mission period resources. And Mike Imwali, who's the archaeologist with the Trust for Historic Preservation, he's really the expert on this type of period, and he coordinated with us and verified the accuracy of those reductions. Think reductions from here on out. Okay, there are no changes to this period. This period is characterized by adobes, essentially, from prior to the state of California taking over, and we've made no changes here. Adobes are very, very rarely encountered, even fragmentary or partial representations of them, so because of that, they're considered quite unique. And so no changes to this area has been made. So this is where, particularly as historians, architectural historians, people who, like yourselves, are interested in the historic period, we have made some changes. And this is the first change. This is the early American transition period, think late 19th century. The areas that have been removed, you can see striped, and they're basically because we have, for example, we've done scores and scores of 219 investigations in all of this area, with only one archaeological site being identified that was really not unique. It didn't have the potential to inform us about someone important in the past, some important event. As a result, this has been scaled down. Let's keep on going, and this is going to be the theme here. This is an American period. This is the very, very late 1870 to 1900. 340 investigations in this area. Only one non-unique insignificant resource found. So the areas that you can see that are striped, they're going up into the west side, over the lower Riviera, and there's just a very lack of sensitivity there, so we are removing those areas. And finally, this is the 20th century, and essentially the only area that this captures is going up into the Riviera and on the west side heading towards County of Santa Barbara. And again, very, very, very few resources found, and so we are actually just removing this and combining it with the previous historic sensitivity zones.
So you're removing the 20th century?
We're combining it, we're backing to the future, backing into the future, yes. Thank you, Vice Chair Uli, for that comment. So we are not giving up any of our objectives and our concerns about making sure that the most likely areas containing archaeological resources based on our database would be appropriately evaluated through either a phase 1 or a letter report. And the tribal cultural resources coordination with the tribes obviously represents a better alignment, or I would say a complete coincidence with state regulations that require this type of consultation informally. And I'll hand it over to Julia.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. So for next steps, we are looking for feedback and your recommendation to take these guidelines to council for adoption. We did receive public comments on this, which were forwarded to HLC for your consideration, and staff and our consultant are happy and prepared to answer any questions or comments about those public comments as well. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, so let's go to public comment now. I'm assuming that completes your report. All right, let's go to public comment in the room.
Yeah, so I have 2 speaker slips. I have Dr. Brian Bass, and then I have Rick Clausen. So, Dr. Bass, if you want to come up.
Thank you. And I apologize, when I pulled up, there was the best spot in the world right there. And I didn't know that some of you hadn't found a spot for parking. What I wanted to just kind of emphasize, I feel, well, one, it's a great adaptation of the MEA with the archaeological guidelines. But I wanted to point out some of the small points that I think have a very big knock-on effect that might not be obvious to people who are not archaeologists. And so I addressed those in some of the comments I sent around, but I wanted to bring it up here. The first one was the reach out, the outreach to the tribal, the different groups, and we're assuming that they're all going to be Chumash. And in the past, meaning like when myself and probably David Stone started archaeology, it was all, we had to snail mail it. And so there was this 2 weeks to send and receive comments, then another 2 weeks where we would respond. And so that would get punched out, like there's a minimum of a month right there. And if we're also including the results of the record search, well, there's probably at least a week, if not 2 or 3 weeks on the front of that, where we have to wait for Brian Barbier and his crew over at the CCIC to provide us the results of the record search, and then we fold that into our query letter that then goes out to the members of the Native American community. And I feel that now in 2025 with mobile phones, emails, and things like this, that time span can be truncated quite a bit. Obviously, there's responsibility on the part of the consultant to make phone calls and follow up, but unlike before, in 1 week's time, we can get on the phone or we can get on the email. Inevitably, there are going to be emails that are no longer valid, phone numbers that are no longer valid. This is just pretty common. It's been common for the 30-plus years that I've been doing this. So I think that it would be important to truncate the time span, given that we do have technology now that allows us to focus in on that. As Nicole pointed out before, what we're focusing on as well is the time and expense for the constituents who are going through the permitting and planning process as well. So as it's currently stated, it's going to be a 5+ week process. This is the reality of it. I trust that, we like things to speed up, and we like the CCIC to give the feedback much sooner, but this is just how it works. And I feel that can be more than halved if we have those time spans cut down that are in the guidelines. The next thing is really well, I'll kind of go in importance. The archaeological monitoring, I think it's important to just have some terminology in there. Again, it's the small stuff, but that we have initial ground disturbing activities, because I've come across situations where contractors and the project proponents feel that they were somehow obligated to have somebody monitoring when any kind of soil was being moved around their project. Now, there are instances, and I pointed out one in my comments that I emailed, where, for example, you might have suspected human remains that might be in some soils that have been previously excavated, and now you want to monitor those soils when they're being moved around. That would be one exception that comes immediately to mind. But otherwise, it's pretty common on sites where they'll relocate some of the dirt, recompact it, use it for other things. They'll also, maybe 3 weeks later, when it's convenient, haul dirt away from a project location. And there's frequently a consensus that needs to be monitored, and it really doesn't need to be, unless there is obviously extenuating circumstances that would dictate that. I don't think that it's necessary to have any kind of titling differences. I definitely feel that the tribal outreach is an important component, and that it will be in every report. Whether there was any feedback or not, that component is still going to be there. I feel like, one, it's going to create a little bit of confusion if you just, let's say in 5 years, I go and look at a report, and it doesn't say on the report that there was any kind of on the cover that there was any tribal involvement. That might indicate to me, oh, okay, well, there wasn't. But there might have been some trailing comments that either went to file or somehow became involved in the process, and the report wouldn't necessarily indicate that. So we still will have to report on the tribal outreach and the process that we're talking about anyway. So I don't know if that would be necessary to be reflected in a title with an if-then kind of approach, to making that decision as far as the titling. I think really those are the main points that I just wanted to bring up. I thank you for your time. I know that I went over 2 minutes. Obviously, I've been doing this for quite a few decades in this jurisdiction, and many others, including ones overseas. And like I pointed out, in my emails, this is really like the gold standard. I have to say that. And so I'm passionate about it, and I felt it was important to provide my input and my experience elsewhere, and specifically here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And considering we don't have any archaeologists on this board, and we regularly review reports that we don't have that expertise in, and we definitely rely on both the experts from the city side as well as others to help inform us.
Wait, don't you have some openings on the?
Yeah, we do. You want to join?
You want to apply?
All right.
All right, there we go. You came here to talk about something, and you got recruited. Thank you. That also is also one of the reasons I was letting you continue on, because I think it's very valuable, especially with our lack of expertise in this specific area. And so thank you.
Thank you.
It has an excellent pay package and benefits package.
Yes, it does. It might actually cover the gas that you spend to drive here.
Trying to get one of these.
Ooh, yeah. But no coffee. You don't get coffee. Okay. And then, sorry, was there another?
Yeah. Next up, I have Rick Clausen, then followed by Heather McDaniel McDevitt.
And so technically you do have 2 minutes, and I don't think you're an archaeologist, so I'll be a little harsher on you.
But 2 minutes is an eye blink for me. I'm a big guy. No, I have found, I don't know anything about archaeology, really, except what I see on TV. But I find this sort of discussion extremely interesting, and I learn stuff just by osmosis, being in the room, and so I do appreciate it. But my comment is not about that so much as it is about the, what little I know about archaeology, and we have we have landmarks that are archaeological. And the way I've looked at them is they cannot be well described because of vandalism and thievery and those sorts of things. All right, which makes the comments that Commissioner Jordan made earlier about the precision of language so much more important when you cannot precisely describe a landmark. My real comment is, in the recent appeal that I presented on the Anapamu Street pine trees, a large part of the staff argument was based on the parsing by the city attorney of your quarter-century ago wording in a landmark document. And I would just encourage in the future, when the commission makes recommendations to the city council, which almost always are just taken, thank you very much, and yes, we vote for this, that at first your recommendation be vetted, probably through the architectural historian, with the city attorney's office, so that 25 years later, another city attorney is not going to parse those words and try and interpret or intuit your intent or the city council's intent. Thanks.
Thank you.
2 minutes.
All right, wow, you did it.
And then last with my speaker slips, I have Heather McDaniel McDevitt.
David, I know I said I wasn't going to say anything, but
She lied.
okay. I did want to just say thank you. I'm just so appreciative to the city to allow those of us that had the honor of, imparting our opinions, whether they were appreciated or not. They were definitely taken with a lot of respect. So, I've worked here, and I would just say a little bit of trivia. I wouldn't be working in Santa Barbara if it weren't for David, and he gave me my first start here. I've been working here for, including my graduate work, for about 18 years. But I just want to say it was a pleasure. It's just like Brian was saying, it is the gold standard. Really, I've just started with another company, and I'm working across the country. There's not one document like this anywhere else that I have seen, and I'm working in 20 different states. So Santa Barbara has, a really wonderful document, and this is going to make it even better. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the involvement, and it's exciting, and I'm really looking forward to working with this document moving forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you. We should get more public comments like that.
Okay, I don't have any more speaker slips. I don't see any hands up online. I do just want to acknowledge that we received written correspondence from Brian Bass. But other than that, public comment is closed. Back to you.
All right, great. All right, to the commission for questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Drury.
Is it possible to bring up miscalculation in the document on page 18 and one where it should be a different word on page 17?
Can we bring up the document or no?
One and one didn't.
I read the whole dang thing because I thought I was supposed to, and it was okay with pro forma most of that back half of it, but the front half was lots of stuff. So on page 17, the last paragraph,
Is it the page number 17? Or like
page
the bottom?
number 17.
Or,
Not the
or the PDF page number 17? Yeah, yeah. Back in the old days when we had that paper copy.
Yes, yeah. It was reliable.
All right.
It's not the same.
Or was it page 8, but the PDF's page 17?
I was just reading it on my computer.
Okay, so maybe it was the PDF page 17.
Oh, is that different?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So
good Lord.
Not to be confused with the page number.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
I don't know, it may not be important, but if this is going to be document going as presented to the city council, it should be important, I guess.
Is that it?
It
Is
was
the top or
it was
bottom?
at the bottom of.
Do you remember the section?
It was instead of saying providing, it should say. God, I can't read my own writing. Wait a minute. You know, it's been a long day already. It should be providing instead of proving, and I think, that being said.
Okay, so then I think it'll be able to find.
Do a word search.
Word search for proving, yeah. Okay, so with that note.
Proving, God.
Okay, other questions?
There was one more. The description of the Paseo Nuevo project was incorrect in terms of the scope or the streets of the project. It's Chapala to State and Canapredita to Ortega. And it said Carrillo was the top of the Paseo Nuevo project. It is not, of course, because it's a big old hotel.
Could you repeat the streets
Yeah,
that
so,
you wished
so
to be identified?
Paseo Nuevo was encompassed by Chapala, Canapredito, State Street, and Ortega. That's the whole project. Del Higuera was subsumed into the Paseo going
Yeah,
west.
and your point is Carrillo is too far north.
A whole block too far, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
The only other thing was in the last slide you showed us, it should say irreplaceable as opposed to irreplicable. Good, I've never heard of irreplicable.
Really?
Really?
It's a typo.
I think it's a typo. Come on.
Creative license.
Be a new word.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all. Otherwise, it was not a tendentious report. It was a typical David Stone written report and well done. But that's just a comment, so I'm not supposed to give that right now.
Yeah. All right, other questions?
Yes, Chair Grumbine, thank you. So just very briefly, just could you explain like the parts that you're taking away or that no longer need to be considered are because, just maybe you could just explain that one more little time, just so
Sure.
I fully understand
Sure.
why it's okay
Sure.
for those to go away.
Sure, Commissioner Insberg, yes. These sensitivity zones have been in the MEA for decades. 1986, I think, was the first one. And they're essentially areas in which the likelihood of a particular resource is greater based on what we know. The areas that have been surveyed and nothing has been found, and things that we have been found. So understandably, as we do more investigations, we come up with more negative information, which is very positive for us, but
No, it's
negative
negative.
information.
You find no concern.
Exactly. And as the number of those negative findings increases and the location in which they are found increases, we are able to confidently eliminate areas of sensitivity. So I take it all on, it's all me, that I looked at the database of where investigations have been completed and where the archaeological sites, as a result, have been recorded. And it's astounding, I mean, astounding in a very positive way. And after 20 years, it's not surprising that our understanding of the sensitivity has
refined,
become
yeah.
much more refined and sophisticated.
And you err on the side of caution, so you
Yes.
know, obviously, so you,
Right.
if you've said, well, we haven't found anything, we've looked at all these areas, there's just not, we just keep coming up
Correct.
with nothing, or
Correct.
maybe that's not the right way to say it, but.
No, you're right,
areas
Commissioner
that-
Ensberg. And I must mention, though, that my esteemed colleague, the environmental analyst, has the discretion to require an investigation in any of those areas that have been summarily removed in the event that there's a very large project, particularly subject to CEQA, rather than the 99% of the projects that we look at that are exempt from CEQA. Remodels, single-family residence is very small. So that we still have that ability, and it does rest. And I would imagine that the environmental analyst, Julia, if she had any concerns about that, would reach out to someone like me or my colleagues, or my colleagues. But I shouldn't be speaking for Julia in this regard.
No, it makes sense and makes
Is that
complete
true,
sense. Yes,
Julia,
thank
what I
you.
just said?
That is true. David and I spoke about, and we made sure to include that provision in the guidelines in a couple of places, that the environmental analyst has the ability to require a report if there's unusual circumstances or when it might be necessary. It hasn't happened. Can't recall any instances where it's happened, but if there's something where maybe there's a comment about a resource being present that we need to investigate, or if there's an EIR for a very large project that is going to require a lot of ground disturbance, then we would require that phase 1 report.
So I shouldn't put my foot in my mouth here, but a very large project that's happening outside of any sensitivity zone
Oh, yes, that one was on
Is-
the border, so we were able to.
is
But
the
yes.
La Cumbra Plaza. It is outside of any sensitivity area, but because of its largesse, I saw that it was subject to a phase 1
Yeah, and I
archaeological
believe that
study,
came before you guys.
for example.
So, to throw a couple more, one simple question that might cover some of the others is, so the 3 points made by Dr. Bass, in terms of timelines, cut down or shortening, archaeology mining during initial ground disturbance, and titling. Can you give us your thoughts or any?
Do you have a penny? Yes, absolutely. They're very appropriate concerns. I do have to digress just a little bit and inform you about tribal cultural resources and what CEQA also provides as the basis for identifying them and whether they are significant. So archaeologists are trained, as architectural historians are, in the definition of significance or defining significance of archaeological sites. We are not Native Americans, so we can interpret the importance of an archaeological site in terms of research and how it can tell us about our past and things. But we are not capable of making that determination as to whether a particular resource, either an archaeological site or a landscape, like you've been talking about, is a tribal cultural resource. The tribal band representatives in the Chumash, and they are identified by the Native American Heritage Commission. We get a list, and they include members of the Barbareño band that you're familiar with. We get Ventureño, Barbareño, which extend from Malibu all the way into Carpinteria. We get a list, of course, from the reservation, the Inizeño or Samala. We even get representatives from the Purismeño in the northern Santa Barbara County area. These people are given, by virtue of CEQA, as well as being an anthropologist, the complete authority to determine what is a tribal cultural resource. It's not for us to say, well, the archaeology, blah, 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 blah. So given that authority that is vested not only by CEQA, but also any agency like ourselves, it's difficult to identify and require, okay, you can only have this amount of time to respond. So if, in the event that there is a CEQA, a project subject to CEQA, like an MND or an EIR, there are other guidelines promulgated through CEQA that define the periods of consultation. And it's a government-to-government consultation. It's the city of Santa Barbara with these tribes. And they can extend for months. They can extend actually for months. Now, with an MND or EIR, you expect things are going to take time. But what we're challenged with, what we're embracing, is trying to get the same quality of feedback from these tribal representatives in an abbreviated period of time. So my work with Santa Barbara County is based on what we're recommending here, which is something that has been promulgated by the Native American Heritage Commission for years, in that, well, let me mention one other thing. So when we're interested in talking with the Barbareño, and you've had Barbareño in front of you, speaking with you, there is a representative, a spokesperson, but that person 100% of the time will not make decisions for the band. The tribal organization is spread, it's very egalitarian, it's very level. There's not like one person there's not a Trump or a Biden. Sorry, not trying to go political there. But what is required is if we share this information with a tribal representative, they say, thank you, we will get back to you because we need to discuss this as our band. And that cannot happen in a short period of time. So that's why we do allow for 2 weeks for this. Now, what Brian pointed out was, how about phone? Well, absolutely. The archaeologist has the ability to expedite and encourage this consultation on a personal basis. But essentially up to 4 weeks is much less than the formal consultation that would be required if the project were subject to CEQA. It will require some additional time on the time frame. And what happens with a project like this is I will complete my investigation and then share it with the bands, because if I don't complete my investigation, they'll say, well, what has been done? What did you find? So it does require a little bit more time. The benefit is that there are very, very few of these phase ones that are being done, as we talked about before. You could remember how many of these phase ones have dealt with prehistoric sites in the last year. Very, very few. Very few. So it's, in terms of the number of projects that are going to require this additional effort, it's very, very few. Monitoring, Brian appropriately pointed out that the language can be used inappropriately. What we're hoping, what we expect, is there's not one size fits all. And what Brian talked about is, well, initial monitoring. Well, with our discussions with these tribal representatives, they want to see that all ground disturbances are monitored. It doesn't matter if, like, vegetation removal in a sensitive area can actually impact archaeological resources below. Pulling up concrete can, etc. So that's all ground disturbances. That doesn't mean monitoring has to begin and then continue until the project grading is done. There's always the ability for the archaeologist working with consulting tribal representative to say, you know what, we haven't seen anything in a long time. We're getting down to soils in which resources cannot be found because they're in the substrate. It's enough. So we do feel, we understand Brian's concerns, but what we do want to represent is this is a standard language that then is used discretionarily in the field, and that all ground disturbances is what Native American, the tribal cultural people of.
So, and actually, as a point of clarification on that. Sure. But you have and this is just my ignorance, but you showed us maps with multiple time periods,
sensitivity,
right? Sensitivity
yeah.
zones. So will that work then, or is this only an issue with tribal sensitivity zones that we're talking about that Brian was, or Dr. Bass was mentioning? Or could it work for some and not for others? Or is it like as long, because what you had just said was saying it for that, and it makes sense as a specific reason.
Right. I didn't expect you to get into the weeds. Perhaps Commissioner Drury has. If one looks very closely at that monitoring condition, it has blanks to fill in where specifically within the project site or in what areas that monitoring is required relative to the sensitivity that the archaeological study included. So we may, Chair Grimbine, have a concern about finding an adobe, an 1850s adobe that was located on the Wackenruder maps. You might remember a project I brought up with you, Ortega and Chapala, and there was the potential for that. So we would recommend monitoring specifically in that portion of the project site that had a higher sensitivity based on the Wackenruder map of 1853 of encountering an adobe.
So, but would,
And that's all ground disturbances within that area.
but couldn't that still, that initial ground disturbances or what, or couldn't that call be made? It seems like there's, and I mean, I'm just not understanding it, that recommendation by Dr. Bass of the initial ground disturbance could then be limited still by what you were saying, like adding an additional sentence saying architecture monitoring initial ground disturbance.
I understand.
As long as it's not.
I understand. Yeah, Commissioner, Chair Grumbine, the problem is with initial. It can be interpreted many different ways. What is initial? When do we stop? You know, when you say all, but you give the discretion to the archaeologist to terminate at any particular point, you're achieving a much more flexible
Okay, Vice Chair Gooley?
application.
Along that same line, the common sense in me says, okay, the initial disturbance of the site to begin the project is when the monitoring occurs, when you've begun digging the hole or the footing or the whatever.
Major grading.
Right, major grading, when the initial disturbance occurs. So you're gonna scrape it up, you're monitoring, you're gonna scrape it up and you're gonna dig it up and then you're gonna put it in a pile. Right? If nothing has been well, you won't.
Assuming you're not finding anything.
You won't get brushes unless you find something. So that initial disturbance is stockpiling the waste from this digging that has been monitored. But then you come along and now you're going to disturb your pile that you dug up that was monitored. Do you need to monitor the dug up pile? I think that was the point. Yeah. So are the guidelines clear about that situation?
I commend your enthusiasm, all of you, I really do. Isn't it great, you guys? The idea is ground disturbances. After material has been stockpiled, that's what we say in the biz, stockpiled, that's not ground disturbance anymore. Yeah. So we're only
Even
focused.
without initial in there, it still covers any breaking of fresh ground, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's very good. I've got a couple more if you don't mind.
Yeah.
He had a question about the titling. The
Yeah,
titling.
you want
I'll finish.
Go ahead.
Okay, this again, in the event that our outreach with the Native America, the Chumash band representatives indicate there is a tribal cultural resource. The reason why I suggested it, and it actually has been approved by the Native American bands working with us, is again, CEQA characterizes tribal cultural resources as completely distinct from archaeological resources. If you look in CEQA, you'll find it discussed in different sections. If you look in Appendix G, which is the initial study checklist, it has significance criteria. There's cultural resources, and then way later, there's tribal cultural resources. The idea is that we have to have heightened respect and sensitivity to their concerns, and that's why the separateness because tribal cultural resources can be more than prehistoric resources. They can be cultural landscapes, and that's why there's a hierarchy that creates them at an equal rather than included under prehistoric.
So through the chair, one titling scenario might be XYZ report, and another one might be XYZ report with tribal consultation or something, as an example. The title of the report is what you're highlighting.
Vice Chair Uli, it's going to title only what's found, because what we're thinking is there will be outreach with these Phase 1 reports. If nothing is found as a result of the outreach, the title will not include tribal cultural resources.
Got it.
So it's to heighten the presence of these resources that are distinctly identified by this cultural group.
Other questions?
Yeah, one more. I noticed on your early American period zone map, there was a little blotch over on the mesa, and I think that was the lighthouse, so that little blotch in the lower left of the map, I think that's the lighthouse site, isn't it? As Meigs turns into shoreline.
Oh, yeah.
That's the lighthouse site.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't exist anymore, does it? So I guess. So if I understand the reasoning for gerrymandering the maps and eliminating some areas, isn't that the term, gerrymandering the map? You change a boundary of a map, so you've gerrymandered it? Isn't that the? No, I think.
It's very specific,
Yeah.
gerrymandering.
Anyway. Is to potentially or allow some sites that don't have the potential for a resource based on how you've described it, to not be burdened with having to do an investigation initially unless the environmental analyst says, oh, this is special, and so you got to do it, right?
Vice Chair, well, yeah, project sites
Yeah.
within the sensitivity zone
Yeah.
are not going to be required to have this level of review.
Which is good, yeah. For applicants, that is.
It's
job
more-
gerrymandering.
It's expeditious, and it's based on substantial evidence, these numbers, so.
All right, any other questions?
I have
Commissioner
one
Jordan?
quick question, then I have a couple of comments. Quick question about the people who were consulted on this. You mentioned 6 archaeologists, 6 local archaeologists? Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other?
Commissioner Jordan, we identified people who we felt had the most extensive experience with
I'll
implementing
jump
the
to my
MEA.
comment now. For a city of 92,000, to have that many archaeologists or that many people with expertise is an indication of how special Santa Barbara is. I've said on a number of other occasions, the level of design and historical expertise in this town is out of all proportion to 92,000 people. It's just a comment.
So we're basically platinum standard now?
I mean, it's the same with the opera and the symphony. Towns
And
this size don't have those.
architects, too.
They're pretty good, too.
The artists are okay.
But I've lived in other towns
Yeah.
of 90 to 100,000
Yep.
that couldn't get
Yeah.
6 historians together.
Yep. Okay.
I have one question.
Yep.
One quick
And
question.
then we'll roll into comments.
And this was about the timelines that you asked for us to respond to and that Dr. Bass brought up. And I was curious, are the timelines, since you have these 2 separate things, you've got the tribal and they are special for the different needs that they require.
Yeah.
So is this, the timeline thing seems to be perhaps an issue with that group as you were describing because of how they need to consult with their entire band to be able to get back. So is that something that can be discretionary for them? Or how do you feel about that since you were asking us what our opinion was about expediting and having less time to have a exchange?
Commissioner Hansberg, this is a sensitive issue. With all due respect to my friends in the Chumash community and with any new Native American community, they consider themselves the stewards, not us. And they're just looking at these resources in just a different way. I can't even try to characterize. It's sort of a poetic, we're all familiar with this. And it is difficult, certainly it is encouraged, and I do have a good relationship, I bet Brian and Heather do too, I know they do, to work with them as collaboratively and encouragingly as possible to prepare, to expedite things. But there's a point where we come up against this really sovereignty on their part, and they are the stewards. And it's my experience that we can't push. We can try. And being sensitive and appreciative of their past and what they're trying to do definitely helps with trying to expedite.
No, I support that, and I think, I mean, that's what democracy is all about. They're the ones who know a lot more about that, I think. And we have a 2-minute rule for our talking, right?
Yeah.
So they talk it out as long as they have to talk it out until they're to the end of the discussion. So I understand that, and that was why I was asking the question, is this something that can be left, and you say that you are, work with them to the greatest extent possible, so they are under a different requirement for the response time versus the rest of the world? or
Well,
is that
and
the right
again,
word?
this is a much more expedited time frame than they would expect with
With
complex
other
projects. Mhm.
Okay.
And federal projects. So if there's federal monies, like Public Works is doing something where they're achieving a federal grant or funding, then we're talking months possibly. And that's, I'm sure Public Works is not pleased about, but they know with, under the Section 106 process, the National Historic Preservation Act, these guidelines are much, much longer. So that's another thing that we need to consider. Again, the number of projects that this would affect are very, very small.
Okay.
Very, very small.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Commissioner Gordon?
Thank you.
Yeah, let's roll into comments.
We've had some really excellent public comments at this session about both of these documents, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate that. That said, I'm going to push back a little bit on this point about time, because I'm sympathetic up to a point, but my chief concern is not speed, but ensuring that all the interested parties, tribal, Latino, Oriental, whatever interested party, have adequate time to review and respond. And I would, in writing, drafting this document, privilege adequate over speedy in drafting these recommendations. That's just my recommendation on how to proceed. And the other comment, one size does not fit all. Unfortunately, policy and procedure documents tend to be predicated on just that, one size fits all. And so there's always a tension in writing these documents that I appreciate.
All right. Other comments, and I think with the thoughts in front of us of both, I guess one question is whether whether the commissioners are feeling that the adequate, I think in this case there was the 3 questions brought forward from the public were adequately answered, as well as any other things that we feel are would need to adjust before we would before we accept the recommend, or we would recommend to City Council to approve these updates. So along those lines, if you want to comment or have something in particular. Otherwise, is everyone feeling good about it and adequately answered?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I suppose off of Commissioner Jordan's comment about the timeline, if there's a way to phrase that timeline to get that sense. I mean, obviously, a policy document like this has to have a timeline in it. I mean, you just can't have it open-ended. But it should be worded or structured in such a way that it either is the least amount of time and let the clock run so that people are feel like they've been heard and adequately given time. So I don't know if the timing stated in the document now is kind of the rough minimum amount of time you would expect the process to run, or what?
I wanted to mention, Vice Chair Uli, that the Chumash tribal representatives who form our advisory group on the other side have agreed to this.
Oh, good.
Have agreed to this, which is welcoming. To say whether it's going to be all used up every time,
Who knows?
who knows, but at least they feel that this is something in a regulation that they're comfortable with.
Very good.
Commissioner Uli, through the chair, if I may. First, I would like to thank Dr. Bass for his thoughtful comments and his engagement in this process. We had a wonderful and insightful conversation earlier this week as well. And I understand how this impacts the consultant and applicants and the process a bit, because it does add to the timeline on their side. I also want to emphasize that we are also proposing in turn to allow for a staff acceptance for phase 1 projects that have negative findings, and that there can be an adjustment on time on that side as well. And also in the guidelines, we do explain that if there is no response within a certain period, then the report can be finalized and summarize the documentation of what outreach happened.
So a default, essentially.
Correct, yes.
If there are no other comments, I'll make a motion that we forward this to City Council for approval as recommended.
I'll second that.
Oh, I heard Commissioner Jordan, he beat
He
you.
got 2 more.
What's that? All right, we have a motion and a second. Under discussion, under discussion, I would like to comment as well that, that both, for one, thank you for this excellent job on these guidelines. And also to Dr. Bass and the others who have been part of this and participated in this, I really want to thank you very, very much, because I think there's a reason why this is the gold standard. That makes total sense, because of all this, because of all the strong, vigorous input, the thought, the dedication and volunteer hours, basically, of people not being paid to try to work out, except for you were paid this time. But to really come together and work on this, and I think that this is a great example of great success and part of what makes our community so good and so strong. So thank you all.
Chair, you just reminded me something of really important that is tied to this, that was mentioned in another situation, which was the Objective Design Development Standards, which was at City Council this last Tuesday. And our consultant from Opticos made the statement at that time that, because they do a lot of these reports for all kinds of cities, and he said everybody wants to be Santa Barbara. That because of our beautiful built environment and because of the gorgeous everything that we have, that he said all of the other cities look to Santa Barbara to want to copy and be like Santa Barbara. It was speaking of gold standards. So I just, that made me think of that, and I think it's just a really important thing, especially as HLC, to remember. Thank you.
That's right. But none of them will be. They just want to be. No, no. So thank you all for this. Just as part of the side comments. We're not yet. That was under discussion. That was why I was allowed to go.
May I just make one
Sure.
quick? I wish that to recognize Dr. Glassow.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw him about a week ago, and I said, they really don't know what you look like. And he said, yeah, I really.
We've never seen him. Does he exist?
But I tell you, he has volunteered his time.
Yeah.
For reviewing each and every thousands and thousands of documents, and he doesn't have to do that. And I just want you to know that he appreciates what you do, but without him, none of this works. None of this works.
So if 100 years from now he's still approving of reports, I'm going to start wondering. All right. All right. So I think we're ready for a roll call vote, please.
Okay, Commissioner Jordan,
Yes.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Commissioner Ensberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lenvik,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Vice Chair Uli,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for being part of it. All right. All right. And I think with that, the meeting is adjourned.